don't care how corny it sounds, I'll never stop being a lover boy. Not until I get the kind of love I've always imagined. The kind where there is no one else, no distractions, no half-interest, just one person in a world that feels smaller because of it. I want that kind of love where it doesn't wander, where nobody else even registers, where loving them feels natural, not forced. The kind of love that feels cinematic without trying. Just two people driving nowhere, standing in open fields, traveling for no reason other than wanting to be together. The kind of love you don't just feel in your chest, you feel it in your soul, hot, intense, alive. And I don't understand how people walk around acting indifferent to that. Love is something casual, like it doesn't matter, because love is everything. Sharing the world with someone, learning their habits, knowing their moods, understanding them in ways nobody else does. Going from strangers to someone you can't imagine life without, there's nothing like it. And yeah, love comes with risk, heartbreak, loss, pain, but I'm here for all of it, because if that's the price of loving deeply, I'll pay it. I'll take the heartbreak, I'll take the uncertainty, I'll take the risk. The lover boy in me isn't dying. It can't. What makes it hard sometimes isn't loving deeply. It's loving deeply in a world that pretends not to care. People act like being attached is embarrassing, like wanting someone fully is something you should hide. They call it nonchalant. They call it cool. They call it protecting yourself. But to me, it just feels empty. I don't want love that's casual. I don't want half interest. I don't want to act like I wouldn't be crushed if I lost someone I care about. I want to feel it. I want the kind of love where my heart is all the way in. No exits, no backups, no pretending. And yeah, that makes me vulnerable. It means I get hurt easier. It means I feel things more intensely, but I'd rather feel everything than live numb just to look unbothered, because loving deeply isn't weakness, it's courage. It takes guts to say I want you fully. I'm choosing you. I'm not scared to care. And maybe that's why it feels lonely sometimes, because not everyone is built to love like that. But I am. And I'm not going to dull that part of me just to fit into a world that treats love like it's optional. Loving this way hurts more because you don't do it halfway. You don't keep one foot out the door. You don't love with conditions. You don't calculate how much to give. When you fall completely. And that means when things don't work out, it hits harder. You don't just lose a person, you lose the future you already imagined, the places you pictured going together, the version of yourself that only existed with them. People say, I don't get your hopes up, protect your hair less, but that's never been you. You don't know how to want someone quietly, you don't know how to love without meaning it, and you don't want to learn, because even when it hurts, loving deeply still feels better than pretending you don't care. Yeah, heartbreak changes you. It slows you down, makes you cautious for a while, but it never kills that part of you that believes in something more. And that's the difference. Some people close their hearts after pain. Others keep theirs open, not because they're naive, but because they refuse to let disappointment turn them cold. You don't love deeply because it's easy. You love deeply because that's who you are. And even when it costs you, you'd rather feel everything than live a life that feels empty. The truth is, you already know how this can end. You know love can break you. You know it can leave scars. You know it can take pieces you don't get back, and still you choose it. Not because you're reckless, not because you're desperate, but because a life without love feels smaller than a life with heartbreak. You're not chasing perfection, you're chasing connection. The kind that makes the world feel louder and quieter at the same time. The kind that turns ordinary moments into memories. The kind that makes you feel seen in ways words can't explain. People say love like that is unrealistic, that it only exists in movies or stories, but you've felt glimpses of it, enough to know it's real, and once you've felt that, you can't pretend you don't want it anymore. So yeah, you risk it again, you open your heart again, you believe again, not because you forgot the pain, but because you decided it wasn't stronger than your capacity to love. Being a lover boy doesn't mean you ignore reality, it means you face it and still choose love anyway when you say you want that kind of love. You're not talking about perfection. You're not chasing fantasy or some unrealistic fairy tale ending. You're talking about presence, the kind of love where you don't feel alone even when you're silent, where being together feels natural, not forced, where effort doesn't feel like work. Is waking up and knowing there's one person in the world who chooses you without hesitation, not because they have to, but because they want to. It's traveling with no plan and still feeling grounded, standing in open spaces and realizing the world feels fuller just because they're next to you. It's loyalty without fear, commitment without control, love that feels intense but never unsafe. That's the kind of love you want. Not obsession, not possession, connection. The kind where you don't question intentions, you don't wonder where you stand, you don't compete with distractions, you're just there, fully, openly chosen, and wanting that doesn't make you unrealistic, it makes you honest. Because once you know how deeply you can love, you stop settling for anything that asks you to dim that fire. Waiting doesn't scare you, settling does. You've seen what happens when people accept less than what they feel. They grow distant, they grow quiet, they start convincing themselves that good enough is enough, and you don't want that. You don't want a love that feels convenient. You don't want someone who chooses you only when it's easy. You want someone who stays when it's real, when it's messy, when it requires effort. So you wait, not because you think you're better than anyone, but because you know yourself. You know how deeply you love, you know how much you give, and you know what happens when that kind of heart ends up in the wrong hands. You'd rather be alone than feel lonely next to someone who doesn't meet you where you stand. And yeah, some days it gets heavy, watching people pair off, watching others settle into relationships that look fine on the surface, but deep down, you're not jealous. You're patient, because you're not searching for company, you're waiting for alignment, or someone who doesn't flinch at your intensity, who doesn't joke about your softness, who doesn't treat your loyalty like it's replaceable. You're waiting for someone who wants the same kind of love you do, all in, no exits, and until that shows up, you're not lowering your standards, you're protecting your heart. If it ever happens, when someone finally matches your energy, you'll feel the difference immediately. Not fireworks, not chaos, not anxiety disguised as excitement, clarity. You won't question where you stand. You won't wonder if you're asking for too much. You won't feel like you're loving harder than you're being loved. It'll feel mutual in a way you're not used to. They won't flinch at your intensity. They won't joke about you caring too much. They won't act overwhelmed by the way you love. They'll meet it. Your effort won't scare them. It'll reassure them. Your loyalty won't feel rare. It'll feel natural. And the craziest part, you won't feel like you're chasing anything. No convincing. No proving, no waiting for them to catch up emotionally. They'll already be there. And suddenly, all that waiting makes sense. All the times you didn't settle, all the times you walked away, all the times you chose being alone over being half-loved. You'll realize you weren't asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. When someone finally loves you the way you've always loved others, it won't feel overwhelming. It'll feel right. At the end of everything, after the waiting, the heartbreak, the disappointment, the almost, one thing never leaves: your capacity to love. You don't lose it, even when people try to convince you that you should, even when the world rewards detachment, even when acting unbothered looks easier, even when caring deeply costs you more than you expected, because loving fully was never a phase for you. It's part of who you are. You were built to feel things deeply, to choose one person and mean it, to love in a way that's intentional, loyal, and complete. And yeah, that makes you vulnerable, but it also makes you real. The lover boy in you survives every heartbreak, not because you forget the pain, but because you decide it's not stronger than your heart. You don't regret loving, you don't regret believing, you don't regret wanting something rare, because one day someone will meet you in that same place. They won't laugh at your intensity. They won't treat your love like it's extra. They won't ask you to tone it down. They'll recognize it, and when that happens, everything you held on to will make sense. So no, the lover boy in you doesn't die, he just waits. And when the right love finally arrives, he'll be ready. Sometimes I feel like love just isn't meant for me. Not in a dramatic way, not in a woe is me way, just quietly, like I've watched it find everyone else and somehow keep missing me. I've done the work, I've tried to heal, I've tried to be patient, I've tried to love right, and still, nothing sticks. People come close, but never close enough to stay. They show interest, but never intention. I'm always almost chosen, almost loved, almost enough. And after a while, you stop asking what's wrong with them and start asking what's wrong with you. You start wondering if maybe you're just built differently, if maybe you feel too deeply for a world that loves lightly. I don't think love avoids me because I'm unlovable. I think it avoids me because I don't fit into how people love now. I don't do casual well. I don't know how to care halfway. I don't know how to pretend I wouldn't be hurt if it ended. And that makes people uncomfortable. They like the idea of me. They like the attention, they like being wanted, but when it comes time to choose, to commit, to stay, they hesitate. So I end up alone again, not because I didn't try, but because I refuse to chase what doesn't choose me back. And that's the part no one talks about. Sometimes loving yourself means accepting that love might take longer to find you, or worse, that it might not come at all. And that's a scary thought because I don't want much. I don't want perfection. I don't want fantasy. I just want someone who stays, someone who doesn't get overwhelmed by sincerity, someone who doesn't confuse depth with pressure. But the longer time passes, the quieter that hope gets. Not gone, just tired. I don't hate love. I don't resent it. I'm just starting to wonder if it has a place for me, and if it doesn't, I guess I'll have to learn how to live a full life without it. Not because I stopped believing, but because believing started to hurt more than letting go. It's not even the loneliness that gets me anymore, it's the pattern. How people come into my life with energy and leave with excuses. How they swear they like me, but never enough to stay consistent. Never enough to choose me when it's not convenient. Never enough to make me feel secure. And I'm tired of hearing the same lines in different voices. I'm not ready. I'm focusing on myself. You deserve better. And maybe I do. But why does better never turn into someone who stays? At some point you stop feeling unlucky and start feeling singled out. Like love has an address, and somehow it keeps getting my name wrong. I watch people get loved loudly, chosen publicly, protected without asking, and me? I get almost commitment, almost consistency, almost somebody's favorite, and that almost does something to you. It makes you question your personality, your looks, your worth, your timing. Like if you could just fix one thing, love would finally land. But then the quiet truth hits. Love isn't avoiding me because I'm impossible to love. It's avoiding me because I don't accept half love anymore. And that scares people because I don't want casual comfort. I want real intention. I want someone who doesn't disappear when it gets deep. Someone who doesn't treat effort like a favor. Someone who doesn't love me in waves. And if that kind of love doesn't exist for me, then I guess the hardest thing I'll ever do is stop waiting for it to show up. Not because I'm bitter, because I'm tired. After a while, you stop getting excited when someone new shows up. Not because you don't want love, but because you don't trust it to stay. So you hold back without meaning to. You don't open all the way. You don't imagine futures anymore. You don't let yourself get attached too fast, because every time you did before, it ended the same way. Distance, silence, someone slowly pulling away while pretending nothing changed. So now you detach early. Not out of coldness, do you? Out of self-defense. You start preparing for the ending before the beginning even settles. You keep one foot out the door because history taught you that staying hopeful hurts more. And the worst part, people feel that. They sense your hesitation, your guardedness, your quiet expectation that this won't last, and they match it. They don't go all in, they don't invest deeply, they keep things light, flexible, undefined, which only confirms what you already believed. Love doesn't choose you fully, so the cycle repeats. You expect love to leave. Love senses you're bracing, no one commits, everyone walks away, and you're left wondering if love avoids you, or if you've learned not to trust it enough to let it stay. That's the cruel part. You didn't become distant because you don't care. You became distant because you cared, and it kept costing you. So now you protect yourself by expecting less, and every time love passes you by, it reinforces the same quiet thought. Maybe love isn't meant to find me. Maybe it's meant to pass through. Eventually, hope stops hurting loudly. It just fades. You don't cry about love anymore. You don't rant about it. You don't even talk about it much. You just stop expecting it. You start telling yourself that maybe love is for other people. People who are easier, people who don't feel as deeply, people who fit better into how relationships work now. And that belief settles in quietly. You still show up. You still try when someone new comes around. But there's a ceiling now. You don't let yourself dream past the present. You don't imagine forever. You don't let excitement get too loud. Because disappointment trained you, you learned that getting your hopes up only makes the fall harder. So you keep them low, manageable, contained. People think you're calm, they think you're chill, they think you're emotionally mature, but really you're just tired of believing in something that keeps proving you wrong. You start romanticizing independence, telling yourself you don't need love anyway, that you're better off alone, that attachment is overrated, and maybe part of that is true. But another part of you still aches when you see people chosen easily, loved openly, protected without asking. You don't envy them. You just wonder why it never seems to be you. And the scariest thought creeps in, what if this isn't a phase? What if this isn't healing? What if this is just acceptance? Acceptance that love won't find you no matter how patient you are, no matter how much you grow, no matter how carefully you love. So you make peace with the idea that maybe love isn't your story, and that peace feels less like relief and more like surrender. At some point, you stop chasing love altogether. Not in a dramatic, I'm done with love way, but in a quiet, tired way. You stop looking for it in rooms, stop expecting it in conversations, stop wondering if this person might finally be different. You still show up, you still talk, you still connect, but the hunger is gone. Not because you're fulfilled, but because you're exhausted. You've wanted love for so long that wanting it started to feel embarrassing, like asking for something that clearly wasn't meant to be yours. So you replace longing with numbness. You tell yourself you're fine, that you don't need anyone, that independence is better anyway. And some days you believe it, but other days it feels like you've just buried something alive. You don't get butterflies anymore. You don't get excited about potential. You don't let yourself feel anticipation, because anticipation has disappointed you too many times. People mistake this version of you for healed. They say you're strong. They say you're grounded. They say you've matured. But what they don't see is how much of that softness you had to shut down to survive. You didn't stop wanting love because you outgrew it. You stopped because wanting it started to hurt too much. And now you're in this strange in-between place. Not heartbroken, not hopeful, just waiting without believing. And the thought that scares you the most isn't being alone. It's wondering if you've waited so long that even if love did find you now, you wouldn't know how to let it in. Sometimes the thought hits you that maybe love did try to find you before, and that's harder to sit with than believing it never came at all, because then you have to ask yourself, if you were too hurt to see it, too guarded to trust it, too used to disappointment to believe something good could last, you replay moments differently now. People who tried to get close, but you kept at arm's length. Connections you didn't fully invest in because you were already bracing for the end. Not because they were bad, but because you were tired. Tired of hoping, tired of opening up, tired of being the one who cared more. So you stayed cautious, you stayed reserved, you stayed prepared to lose, and maybe that protection kept you safe, but it also kept you distant. That realization stings because it means love wasn't always the one that failed to show up. Sometimes it showed up quietly and you were too wounded to let it stay. But even knowing that, you don't blame yourself. You were doing what you knew how to do to survive repeated disappointment. You weren't cold, you weren't careless, you were scared to believe again and have it fall apart like it always did. So you chose control over vulnerability, distance over hope, certainty over possibility. And now you're left wondering if love will ever feel safe enough again to recognize when it's real. That question lingers, not loudly, not urgently, just quietly in the back of your mind. At some point, fear quietly replaces hope, not all at once, not dramatically, just slowly. You stop expecting good things to last. You stop trusting excitement. You stop letting yourself believe that something real could finally choose you. So you protect your heart. At first, it feels smart, responsible, like growth. You don't overshare. You don't get attached too fast. You don't let people see how much you care. But over time, protection turns into distance. You're not just guarding against pain anymore. You're guarding against connection. You start filtering yourself, keeping conversations surface level, holding back emotions before they even have a chance to exist. And people feel that. They don't push deeper, they don't try harder. They assume you're not that interested, which feeds the same belief again. Love doesn't choose you. But what's really happening is that fear is deciding for you. Fear is telling you it's safer not to hope, safer not to want too much, safer not to open the door all the way. Because every time you opened it before, something left. So now you keep it cracked, just enough to say you tried, never enough to risk getting hurt again. And that's the quiet tragedy of it. You didn't stop believing in love because you don't care. You stopped because caring started to feel dangerous, and the longer fear sits in the driver's seat, the harder it becomes to remember what hope even felt like. Eventually you start telling yourself you're better off alone, not because you don't want love, but because wanting it feels pointless. You say things like, I'm used to being by myself, I don't need anyone, I'm fine the way I am. And part of that is true, you're strong on your own. You have learned how to survive without being chosen. You can build a life that doesn't depend on someone staying. But there's another part you don't talk about, the part that still wants to be seen, the part that still wants someone to stay without being asked, the part that wonders what it would feel like to finally be someone's first choice. So you compromise with yourself. You don't hope, but you don't fully let go either. You live in this middle space where love is something other people get, and you quietly prepare for a life without it. You stop imagining shared futures. You stop picturing growing old with someone. You plan your life around independence because that's the only constant you trust. And people admire you for it. They call you self-sufficient. They say you're unbothered. They think you're healed. But healing isn't supposed to feel like convincing yourself you don't want something you still ache for. You didn't choose solitude because it fulfilled you. You chose it because disappointment taught you not to expect more. And the scariest part, the longer you live like this, the more normal it feels. Love stops feeling like something missing and starts feeling like something unrealistic. And that's when you wonder if love didn't avoid you at all. If you just slowly stopped believing you were allowed to have it. The truth is, you never stopped wanting love. You just stopped admitting it. You tell yourself you're fine alone, that you've outgrown the need for romance, that you're focused on yourself now. But late at night, when everything's quiet, that truth shows up. You still imagine being chosen, still wonder what it would feel like to be someone's safe place, still crave a love that doesn't hesitate. You just don't say it out loud anymore. Because admitting you still want love feels dangerous. It feels like setting yourself up for disappointment again. Like reopening a door you worked so hard to close, so you downplay it, you joke about it, you bury it under independence and self-control. But wanting love never made you weak. Being hurt just taught you to hide that want better. You learned how to survive without being chosen, but survival was never the same as fulfillment, and deep down you know the difference. You didn't stop believing in love because you healed. You stopped because believing started to feel like self-betrayal. Like hoping for something that never came was making a fool of you. So you chose silence instead. But that silence doesn't mean you're done wanting love. It just means you're tired of wanting it alone. At some point, you have to face the question you've been avoiding this whole time. Is love really done with you, or are you done believing in it? Because the truth is, love didn't disappear overnight. It faded every time you were disappointed, every time someone almost chose you, every time you opened up and watched it fall apart again. Eventually, believing started to feel stupid, like hoping for something that clearly wasn't meant for you. So you stopped. Not because you stopped wanting love, but because you couldn't handle wanting it alone anymore. You told yourself this is just how life turned out, that some people get love and others learn how to live without it, and maybe that belief protected you. It kept you from more heartbreak, more waiting, more letting yourself down, but it also cost you something. It cost you the ability to imagine a future that includes being chosen. It cost you the courage to believe something good could stay. So now you stand here, not hopeless, not hopeful, just tired of wondering, tired of preparing for disappointment, tired of asking why love keeps missing you. And maybe the hardest truth is this: love didn't stop trying to find you. You just stopped leaving the door open, not because you're broken, not because you're unlovable, but because getting your hopes up hurt more than letting them go. And whether love ever finds you or not, one thing is clear now: you didn't lose because you loved too much. You lost because loving started to feel unsafe. So if love ever does come again, it won't be loud, it won't rush you, it won't demand you believe right away. It'll wait, and the real question won't be whether love finds you. It'll be whether you're willing to believe again when it does. Unrequited love is a quiet kind of pain, the kind that doesn't make noise. It just sits with you. It's loving someone who laughs with you, but never looks at you the way you look at them. They're comfortable around you. They trust you. They tell you things. And every time they talk about someone else, you smile, while something inside you cracks just a little more. You learn how to swallow words before they escape, compliments you never say, feelings you never confess, because deep down you already know the answer, so you love them quietly. You notice everything about them, their habits, their moods, the small details nobody else pays attention to, knowing full well you'll never live in their memory the way they live in yours. Somehow you convince yourself it's okay, that being close to them, even like this, is better than being without them at all. You give without expecting, you care without being chosen, you love without being loved back, and that hurts in ways you can't explain. But unrequited love teaches you something too. It shows you how deep your heart really is, how much you're capable of feeling, even when nothing is returned. Just don't disappear inside someone who can't meet you where you are, because one day someone will, and they'll give back everything you once gave away in silence. The hardest part about unrequited love isn't just that they don't feel the same, it's that they're close enough to keep the hope alive. They don't reject you outright, they don't shut the door, they just exist in your life. They text you, they lean on you, they laugh with you, and every small moment feels like maybe you're not imagining it. So you hold on. You tell yourself you're being patient. That timing is the issue, that one day they'll see what you feel so clearly, but deep down, you know you're waiting for something they never promised. And that's why it's so hard to leave, because unrequited love doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like unfinished business. You don't walk away angry, you walk away confused. You wonder if you should have said more, if you should have been quieter, if you waited too long, or tried too hard, and instead of letting go, you stay emotionally tethered, not because you're weak, but because your heart hasn't been given a clean ending, so it keeps hoping, keeps replaying moments, keeps searching for signs that maybe you still matter to them in that way, and that hope is what keeps the pain alive. You begin to wonder why you're always the one feeling more, why you're always the one waiting, why love seems so easy for others but feels just out of reach for you. You start shrinking your needs, telling yourself you don't want much anyway, convincing yourself that loving quietly is enough, but it's not, because caring without being chosen slowly teaches your heart that it should settle for less. You catch yourself doing things just to stay close, being extra understanding, always available, always forgiving. Not because you're weak, but because you're afraid that asking for more will push them away completely. So you accept crumbs and call it connection, and the longer this goes on, the more invisible you start to feel, not just to them, but to yourself. You forget what it feels like to be desired, to be someone's first choice, to be loved out loud, and that's the quiet danger of unrequited love. It doesn't just hurt you, it slowly teaches you to disappear. There's a reason unrequited love is so hard to walk away from. Not just love, it's anticipation. You live in the space of almost chosen, almost wanted, almost enough. Your brain starts clinging to small moments. A long conversation, a shared laugh, a look that might mean something, and those moments keep you hooked because when love isn't returned, your mind fills in the gaps with possibility. You imagine what could be instead of facing what is, and every time you think about letting go, you feel like you're giving up on a future that was never actually promised. So you stay hopeful, you stay available, you stay emotionally invested, not because it feels good, but because walking away feels like loss, even though nothing was ever yours. That's the trap. Unrequited love keeps you chasing closure from someone who doesn't know they're holding it, and the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to separate love from longing. You don't just miss them, you miss the version of yourself that believed it might work. At some point you feel it, the imbalance, you realize you're giving more than you're receiving, then emotionally, mentally, quietly. You're investing energy into someone who isn't investing back. You plan around them, you think about them, you hold space for them, and they just live their life. That's when it starts to hurt differently. Not sharp pain, but exhaustion. You're tired of wondering, tired of hoping, tired of pretending you're okay with crumbs. You notice how much of yourself is tied up in someone who doesn't even know how deeply you care. And for the first time, you ask yourself a hard question. If nothing changes, then how long can I keep doing this? Because loving someone in silence means you never get reassurance, never get clarity, never get chosen, and slowly, it teaches your heart that effort doesn't lead to safety. That love means waiting, that closeness means sacrifice, and that's not fair to you. Love isn't supposed to drain you. It isn't supposed to make you feel invisible. It isn't supposed to cost you your sense of worth, and realizing that is the beginning of letting go, even if your heart isn't ready yet. Letting go doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels wrong. It feels like you're giving up on someone you care about, like you're betraying something that meant a lot to you, even if it was never returned. You start questioning yourself. Am I being selfish? Am I overreacting? Did I just keep loving them quietly like before? Because walking away doesn't just mean losing them. It means losing the hope you've been holding on to. And hope is hard to release. You've built routines around them, emotions around them, a future that only existed in your head but still felt real. So choosing yourself feels like cruelty at first, like you're the one causing the pain, but staying was hurting you too. Just slower, just quieter. And that's the part people don't talk about. Sometimes self-respect feels like grief. Sometimes growth feels like loss. Sometimes choosing yourself feels worse than continuing to wait. But guilt doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you cared deeply. And caring deeply doesn't obligate you to keep hurting yourself in silence. After you finally choose yourself, something unexpected happens. It feels empty, not peaceful, not freeing, just quiet in a way that's uncomfortable. You're no longer waiting for their message, no longer replaying conversations, no longer building your day around the possibility of them. And at first, that absence hurts more than the waiting did, because unrequited love filled space. It gave your emotions somewhere to go. It gave your heart something to hold on to, even if it was hurting you. Though when it's gone, you don't immediately feel relief. You feel loss. You miss the closeness, you miss the routine, you even miss the hope, as painful as it was, and that makes you question your decision. You wonder if you left too early, if you should have tried harder, if loneliness is worse than longing. But this part matters, because this emptiness isn't failure, it's withdrawal. Your heart is unlearning a pattern, and unlearning always feels uncomfortable before it feels right. You didn't lose love, you made room for it, even if nothing has filled that space yet. One day after the emptiness settles, something shifts. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly. You start noticing how much lighter you feel without carrying love alone. You realize how much energy you used to spend hoping, waiting, adjusting, shrinking, all for someone who never met you where you stood. And for the first time, you don't miss them. You miss the idea of being chosen. That's an important difference, because now you know what it feels like to give deeply, and you also know what it costs when nothing comes back. So when love shows up again one day, it feels different. It doesn't make you question yourself. It doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't ask you to love in silence. It meets you halfway. You don't have to hide how much you care. You don't have to settle for almost. You don't have to convince yourself that crumbs are enough. And that's when you understand something fully. Unrequited love wasn't wasted. It taught you the depth of your heart. It proved you're capable of loving purely, selflessly, fully. But it was never meant to be your ending, because love isn't meant to be endured alone. It's meant to be shared. And one day someone will choose you as openly as you choose them. No silence, no guessing, no imbalance, just love. Lust will ruin your life if you don't learn how to recognize it for what it really is. Not temptation, not desire, not even attraction. Lust is a signal. It's like a check engine light flashing on your dashboard, warning you that something deeper is wrong under the surface. And most people don't want to hear that. They'd rather numb it, feed it, distract themselves with it, instead of asking why it showed up in the first place. Because here's the truth. When lust starts controlling your thoughts, your habits, your attention, it usually means you're lacking something real in your life. Not sex, not validation, intimacy. And intimacy doesn't always mean romance. That's where a lot of people get it twisted. Intimacy can be connection, it can be purpose, it can be faith, it can be feeling seen by people who actually care about you. It can be having someone you can talk to honestly without pretending you're okay. When those things are missing, lust steps in as a cheap replacement, gives you a temporary hit, a moment of feeling wanted, a moment of escape, but once that moment passes, you're left emptier than before. That's why lust never satisfies. It promises relief, but delivers restlessness. You indulge, and instead of feeling fulfilled, you feel more hollow, more disconnected, more frustrated with yourself, and then the cycle repeats. Because you're not fixing the problem, you're feeding the symptom. The craving itself isn't the enemy. The lack of awareness is. Lust shows up when you're avoiding something, when you're lonely, when you're stressed, when you're disconnected from yourself. It's your mind trying to fill a void without doing the work to understand why that void exists in the first place. And the more you indulge it without reflection, the more it delays your healing. You tell yourself it's harmless, that it's normal, that everyone does it. But deep down, you know when something isn't sitting right with your spirit. You know when it's no longer about desire and more about escape. This isn't about shame, it's about honesty. Lust is an indicator, a warning sign. A moment where you need to pause and ask yourself, what am I really craving right now? Connection? Comfort? Meaning? Peace? Because until you figure that out, lust will keep pulling you further away from yourself instead of closer to who you're meant to be. Most people don't want to admit this part, but lust usually shows up when you're feeling empty, not when you're fulfilled, when your life feels aligned, when you're grounded, when you have purpose and connection. Lust doesn't scream as loud. It might knock, but it doesn't take over. It only takes control when there's space inside you that hasn't been filled with anything meaningful. That's why lust hits hardest late at night, when you're alone, when the noise dies down, when there's nothing left to distract you from your thoughts. That's when your mind starts looking for something, anything, to feel good for a moment. And lust offers that shortcut. No effort, no vulnerability, no risk of rejection, just instant stimulation. But shortcuts always come with a cost. The more you use lust as an escape, the harder it becomes to sit with yourself. You start avoiding silence, avoiding stillness, avoiding the questions you don't want to answer. You tell yourself you're just satisfying a desire, but really you're training your brain to seek relief instead of growth, comfort instead of clarity. And over time, that changes you. It dulls your motivation. It weakens your discipline. It distorts how you view people, turning them into objects instead of humans. It lowers your tolerance for real connection because real intimacy requires patience, presence, and effort. Things lust never asks of you. This is why people who live in lust often feel stuck, not because they're bad or weak, but because they're constantly numbing the very discomfort that could push them to grow. Pain becomes something to escape instead of something to understand, and healing gets postponed again and again. You have to learn to pause when the urge hits, not to fight it with shame, but to question it. Ask yourself what you're actually missing in that moment. Is it connection, purpose, rest, direction? Because the urge is information, and if you listen to it instead of obeying it, it can lead you to what actually needs attention in your life. Lust loses power the moment you become aware of it. Here's where it gets uncomfortable but important. Lust isn't just about what you want. It's about what you're avoiding. Most people don't struggle with lust because they're overly sexual. They struggle because they're disconnected from themselves, from their purpose, from real relationships, from meaning. When you don't feel fulfilled in your day-to-day life, your mind looks for stimulation, something intense enough to make you forget how empty things feel. Lust is powerful because it hijacks your attention. It pulls you out of the present moment and into fantasy. And fantasy is easier than reality. Fantasy doesn't ask you to change. Reality does. That's why lust becomes a habit, not because it feels good, but because it distracts you from feeling bad. It numbs loneliness, it masks insecurity, it gives you a false sense of control when everything else in your life feels uncertain. But every time you choose that escape, you reinforce the idea that you can't handle discomfort without running from it. And that slowly chips away at you. You start feeling weaker mentally, less disciplined, less confident. You promise yourself you'll stop, then you don't. And now it's not just lust anymore, it's guilt, shame, self-disappointment. You start questioning your self-control, your character, your ability to change, all because you never addressed the root issue in the first place. The problem isn't desire. Desire is human. The problem is unchanneled desire. Desire without direction turns into self-destruction. When your energy isn't going into building something meaningful, it leaks into things that drain you instead. This is why people who overcome lust don't just resist harder, they replace it, they build structure, they strengthen their spirit, they deepen their relationships, they find something worth committing to that gives them purpose beyond momentary pleasure. Lust thrives in isolation, in boredom, in lack of direction. But when your life has meaning, when your days are intentional, when your spirit feels aligned, lust doesn't have much room to grow. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it stops controlling you. Another reason lust has so much power is because it disguises itself as confidence. It makes you feel wanted, desired, in control. For a brief moment, it tricks you into thinking you're fulfilled. But once that moment fades, you're left with the same questions, the same restlessness, the same hollow feeling you were trying to escape in the first place. That's how you know it's not real fulfillment. Real fulfillment doesn't vanish the second the stimulation stops. Real fulfillment gives you peace afterward, not regret. Clarity, not confusion. Strength, not self-disgust. And over time, if you're not careful, lust can start shaping how you view yourself. You begin to associate your worth with how desired you feel instead of who you actually are. You start needing validation just to feel okay. And when that validation isn't there, the craving comes back stronger, not because you're weak, but because your identity is being built on something unstable. This is where self-awareness becomes everything. You have to catch yourself and ask, what am I really avoiding right now? Am I running from loneliness, from boredom, from the work I know I need to do on myself? Lust often shows up when you're avoiding growth, when you're putting off healing, when you're ignoring parts of your life that need attention. The uncomfortable truth is that growth requires sitting with discomfort, requires stillness, silence, discipline, and lust offers you an easy way out of that process. But every time you take that exit, you delay becoming the version of yourself you know you're capable of being. You don't have to be perfect. You're going to slip. You're going to struggle. That's part of being human. What matters is whether you're conscious of the pattern or blindly repeating it. Awareness alone starts breaking the cycle. Because the goal isn't to eliminate desire. Desire is natural. The goal is to stop letting desire control you, to stop letting it dictate your habits, your focus, and your future. When you do that, you don't lose pleasure, you gain freedom. Here's where things start to shift if you're willing to be honest with yourself. Lust isn't just about what you want. It's about what you're avoiding becoming. Every time you give in without thinking, you're choosing comfort over growth. And that choice, repeated enough times, slowly shapes the direction of your life. You start delaying things you know you should be doing. Goals get pushed back, discipline weakens, motivation fades. Not all at once, but subtly. You tell yourself you'll lock in tomorrow, you'll change next week, you'll get serious later, but later keeps moving, and you stay stuck in the same patterns, wondering why nothing feels different. And the worst part? Lust makes you numb to it. It gives you just enough relief to tolerate a life you know you're not fully proud of. It lowers the urgency to change, because why face the discomfort of growth when you can distract yourself instead? This is why so many people feel lost, not because they lack potential, but because they keep trading long-term fulfillment for short-term relief. And relief is never the same as peace. Relief fades, peace stays. When you start addressing the real voids in your life, lust starts losing its grip naturally. When you build structure into your days, when you commit to something bigger than yourself, when you start respecting your time, your body, your mind, when you develop a relationship with God, purpose, or discipline, whatever grounds you, lust doesn't hit as hard, because now you have something to protect. You realize your energy is valuable, your attention is valuable, and not everything deserves access to you. You stop feeding impulses that don't align with the future you're trying to build, not out of fear, but out of respect for yourself. That's when lust stops feeling like a battle, it starts feeling like a signal. A reminder to check in with yourself, to ask, am I aligned right now? Or am I avoiding something I need to face? And every time you choose alignment over impulse, you get a little stronger, a little clearer, a little more in control. At this stage, you start realizing something important. Lust was never the root problem, it was the symptom. The real issue was disconnection. Disconnection from yourself, from purpose, from meaning, from the version of you that feels grounded and whole. Once you see that, the urge loses some of its mystery. It's no longer this uncontrollable force, it's just information. You begin to notice patterns. The urges come when you're tired, when you're bored, when you feel unaccomplished at the end of the day, when you avoided something you know you should have handled, and instead of judging yourself for it, you start listening. You ask, what am I missing right now? Rest, direction, fulfillment, human connection. This is where growth actually happens. When you suppress desire, but when you replace it. When you choose to build instead of escape. When you put energy into things that give back instead of drain you. Working on your body, your craft, your faith, your friendships. Things that leave you stronger afterward, not emptier. And the crazy part is, the more you do this, the quieter lust becomes. Not because it's gone, but because it's no longer needed to cope. You're not running from yourself anymore. You're becoming someone you respect. You start carrying yourself differently. Your confidence becomes real, not borrowed from temporary validation. You don't need constant stimulation to feel alive. You feel solid just being present, just being disciplined, just knowing you're moving in the right direction even when it's uncomfortable. That's when self-control stops feeling like restriction and starts feeling like freedom. Freedom from compulsions, freedom from regret, freedom from waking up feeling disappointed in yourself. You're no longer controlled by every urge that passes through your mind. You won't be perfect, nobody is, but you'll be conscious. And consciousness changes everything, because once you're aware, you get to choose, and choosing growth over impulse again and again is how you reclaim your life. There's a moment where you finally understand that discipline isn't about denying yourself pleasure. It's about choosing a better one, a deeper one. The kind that doesn't disappear the second the screen goes dark or the urge passes, the kind that stays with you when you're alone with your thoughts and you can actually respect the person staring back at you. You start realizing how much time and energy you were leaking, hours, focus, mental clarity, all going towards something that never loved you back, never built you up, never moved your life forward. And once you see that clearly, it's hard to unsee it. You begin protecting your mind the same way you'd protect your body. You stop feeding it things that weaken it. Now, this is where restraint becomes self-respect. You're no longer saying no because you're scared. You're saying no because you finally understand the cost of saying yes. You've felt the emptiness after. You've lived the fog. You've experienced how indulging too much slowly disconnects you from your ambition, your relationships, your purpose. And something else changes too. You start seeing people differently, not as objects, not as outlets, but as humans again, with depth, with emotion, with stories. Real connection stops feeling boring, it starts feeling rare, valuable, something worth protecting instead of rushing. That's when intimacy starts to return in healthier forms, real conversations, genuine friendships, moments of stillness that don't need to be filled, a sense of closeness with yourself that you didn't even realize you were missing. And once you taste that, lust loses its grip even more, because now you're building something, a life you don't need to escape from, a version of yourself you're proud of. When that happens, the urge doesn't disappear, but it no longer controls you. It passes like a thought, like a wave. At the end of the day, lust only has power when you don't understand it. When you finally see it for what it is, a signal, not a solution, it stops running your life. You stop treating it like something you must obey and start treating it like something you observe, and that shift changes everything. You realize you don't need to be perfect to be disciplined. You just need to be honest. Honest about what you're missing, honest about what you're avoiding, honest about who you want to become, because every urge is an invitation, not to indulge, but to check in. Once you start responding instead of reacting, you regain control. You stop letting momentary desire dictate long-term direction. You stop trading peace for pleasure. You stop delaying your growth for comfort, and slowly, your life begins to align with the values you claim to have. Lust didn't ruin you. Revealed the places where healing was needed, the moments where connection was missing, the areas of your life that needed structure, purpose, and depth. And once you start filling those spaces intentionally, lust no longer screams for attention. It fades into the background. You become more present, more focused, more grounded. You don't feel constantly pulled in 100 directions anymore. You know what matters, you know what doesn't, and you act accordingly. This isn't about becoming cold or denying desire. It's about mastering yourself, about building a life where your mind works for you, not against you, where your choices reflect your values, where you don't need escape because you're finally moving towards something real. And when you get there, you'll look back and realize something important. The urge was never the enemy. Ignoring the message was. I don't think I've ever been someone's first choice. Not immediately. Not without hesitation. I've been liked, wanted, texted every day. But when it came down to it, there was always a pause. Let me think. I'm not sure what I want. The timing isn't right. And you start noticing a pattern. You're good enough to keep around. Good enough to talk to. Good enough to feel close to. But not good enough to be picked without doubt. And that does something to you, because you don't want to compete. You don't want to prove yourself. You don't want to convince someone to see what's already there. You just want one person who doesn't hesitate, one person who doesn't compare you, doesn't explore other options, doesn't need to figure it out, just chooses you. And when that hasn't happened yet, the question creeps in quietly. Is there something about me that makes people unsure? When you're never the first choice, you start overperforming. You become extra understanding, extra patient, extra available. You respond faster. You give more reassurance. You try to be easier to love, because maybe if you're perfect enough, they won't hesitate. Maybe if you don't complain, don't ask for too much, don't pressure them, they'll finally pick you confidently. So you adjust, you downplay your needs, you accept the bare minimum, you tell yourself you're just being mature, but really, you're trying to secure a spot, you're trying to prove that you're worth choosing. And the painful part is this: even when you give your best, even when you're thoughtful, loyal, consistent, they still hesitate. And that's when it hits. It was never about you not doing enough. It was about them not being sure. And no amount of overperforming can fix someone else's uncertainty. After a while, it stops feeling like coincidence. It starts feeling like proof. Proof that maybe you're missing something, that maybe there's a quality you don't have, that maybe you're just almost exciting enough, almost attractive enough, almost unforgettable. And when you sit with that long enough, it begins to chip at your confidence. You start comparing yourself to the people they did choose. What do they have that I don't? What do they do differently? Why was it easier to commit to them? And the dangerous part? You begin to rewrite yourself in your head. Maybe I'm too available, too soft, too deep, or maybe not enough of something else. So you question your personality, your timing, your worth. But here's the truth that hurts before it heals. Someone else's preference is not a measurement of your value. You can be incredible and still not be someone's first choice. Not because you're lacking, but because alignment isn't forced. And just because someone didn't see you clearly doesn't mean you weren't clear. It just means they weren't your person. At some point you get tired, not bitter, not angry, just tired. Tired of feeling like you're competing without signing up for a competition. Tired of being compared to other options. Tired of waiting for someone to decide. Tired of proving you're worth choosing. And something shifts. You You stop trying to outshine anyone. You stop adjusting yourself to win. You stop playing it cool just to stay in the running, because love isn't supposed to feel like auditions. You shouldn't have to outperform someone to be valued. You shouldn't have to worry about whether you're the best option available. You either align or you don't. And once you realize that, you stop competing. You don't fight for a spot. You don't beg to be prioritized. You don't argue your value. You just observe. If someone's unsure, that's your answer. Not because you're not enough, but because you refuse to be an option. And the moment you stop competing, you stop feeling small, because you remember something important. You're not here to be the best choice in a lineup. You're here to be the only choice for the right person. The moment you refuse to compete, your standards rise automatically. You stop accepting, let's see where this goes. You stop entertaining mixed signals. You stop tolerating being someone's backup plan, because if someone has to compare you, they're not aligned with you. It's that simple. You don't need to be better than anyone else. You don't need to win. You don't need to outperform. You just need someone who sees you and doesn't hesitate. And once you decide you're no longer an option, you start moving differently. You don't over-explain. You don't over-give. You don't overstay. If someone's energy feels unsure, you don't chase clarity. You step back, not to play games, not to test them, but because you value yourself enough to not beg for certainty. And here's the truth. The right person won't need alternatives. They won't weigh you against other options. They won't keep you around while exploring. They'll know. And when you finally believe you deserve that kind of clarity, you stop asking, why am I never the first choice? Because you realize you were just giving your energy to people who weren't capable of choosing fully. Being someone's second option was never your identity. It was a season, a pattern you tolerated, a dynamic you accepted, a lesson you hadn't learned yet, but it was never who you are. You weren't born to compete for attention. You weren't designed to be compared. You weren't meant to sit around waiting for someone to decide if you're enough. That was just a chapter, and chapters end. What you thought was rejection was actually redirection. Because imagine being fully chosen by someone who had to debate it. Imagine building something with someone who once hesitated. That foundation would always feel shaky. So maybe not being first protected you from being second in someone's heart. Maybe every time someone paused, it was life removing you from something that wasn't certain. You weren't overlooked, you were misaligned. And misalignment isn't failure, it's filtering. You're not destined to be the second option. You were just learning what it feels like, so you'd never accept it again. Everything changes when you stop identifying as the almost. You stop saying, this always happens to me. You stop expecting to be overlooked. Stop bracing for hesitation. Stop assuming you'll be compared. Because when you carry the identity of being second, you unconsciously accept second place behavior. You tolerate inconsistency. You excuse uncertainty. You stay longer than you should. But the moment you decide that's not who you are, your tolerance drops. You don't romanticize mixed signals. You don't wait around for someone to decide. You don't attach yourself to potential. You start moving like someone who expects clarity, and that energy is different. You ask direct questions. You communicate directly. You walk away directly, not because you're cold, because you're done being confused. You're not almost. You're not maybe. You're not will see. You're either fully chosen or you're unavailable. And once you internalize that, the pattern breaks because you no longer accept roles that don't fit you. Being someone's first choice starts with being confident enough to walk away. Because if you're afraid to lose them, you'll accept almost. You'll accept, I'm not ready. You'll accept, I need time. You'll accept being kept around while they figure it out. Not because you're weak, but because you don't want to lose the connection. But here's the shift. The moment you realize you're okay walking away, you stop settling for hesitation. You stop clinging to potential. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop staying where you feel unsure. And that energy changes everything. You don't threaten to leave. You don't play games. You just won't stay where you're not certain. And And when someone feels that, they either step up or they step out. Both are clarity, because being someone's first choice isn't about demanding it, it's about being willing to lose anything that doesn't offer it. And once you're strong enough to walk away from confusion, you stop ending up in it. The right person won't make you question your position. You won't have to decode their text. You won't have to wonder where you stand. You won't have to compete with silence. When someone is sure about you, it shows in consistency, in effort, in how they talk about you, in how they prioritize you. There's no gray area, and that's what you've been missing. Not love, not attraction, not chemistry, clarity. Because every time you felt like you weren't the first choice, it wasn't because you lacked something, it was because the situation lacked certainty. The right connection won't feel like a tryout. It won't feel like you're waiting for results. It won't feel like you're one option among many. It will feel stable, secure, intentional. And when you experience that, you'll realize something important. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. So why was I never the first choice? The truth, because I was entertaining people who weren't capable of choosing fully. It was never about my worth, never about me lacking something, never about me being second best. It was about alignment. I was trying to be first in rooms where I was only an option. And once I stopped accepting that role, everything changed. I don't compete anymore. I don't overperform. I don't wait to be picked. If someone hesitates, I step back. If someone compares, I remove myself. If someone isn't sure, I let them find certainty somewhere else. Because I finally understand something. The right person won't struggle to choose me. They won't need alternatives. They won't need time to decide if I'm enough. They won't treat me like a possibility. They'll treat me like a decision. And until that shows up, I'm not missing out. I'm filtering. So I'm done asking, why am I never the first choice? Now the question is simpler. If I'm not your first choice, why are you still an option for me? And that's the shift. It's always at night when everything hits at once. Your room gets quiet, your phone is dry, everyone's asleep, and suddenly your mind keeps replaying everything. You try to forget the laughs, the old texts, the what ifs. You start missing people you swore you moved on from. You start feeling things you buried a long time ago. And it's not even about wanting them back. It's about wishing things just ended differently. Wishing you said more or nothing at all. You ever lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling like the past is louder than the present? Like Aaron from Attack on Titan, haunted by the weight of what's already gone, but still pretending to move forward like it doesn't hurt. And the worst part? You can't talk to anyone about it because it's 2 a.m., and no one would get it anyway. But let me remind you this. Those memories, they're just echoes. They feel loud now, but they don't define you. You lived through them, and you're still here, and yeah, it hurts, but that means you cared. And caring, that's not weakness. That's proof you're human. So breathe. You won't feel like this forever. It always gets heavier at night. Not during the day when there's noise, distractions, people moving around. It's when everything finally shuts off. When your room is still, your phone hasn't buzzed in hours, and the world feels like it forgot about you. That's when your thoughts stop waiting their turn. Your mind starts pulling things out of storage you didn't ask for. Old conversations, screenshots you never deleted, moments you thought you were over until they show up uninvited. You tell yourself you've moved on, and maybe you have. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It just means learning how to live with what still lingers. You don't even want them back. That's the confusing part. You just wish things had ended cleaner, wish you explained yourself better, or maybe wish you stayed quiet instead of saying too much. You replay scenarios that can't be fixed, trying to rewrite endings that are already locked in. You lie there staring at the ceiling, feeling like the past is louder than the life you're living right now, like everything that mattered before is screaming for attention, while the present barely whispers. You wonder why it still affects you, why it still sneaks up on you when you thought you were stronger than this. And the worst part is the timing. It's too late to text anyone, too late to explain how heavy your chest feels, too late to ask for reassurance without feeling dramatic. So you just sit with it, alone, letting it hit you in waves. It's like carrying something invisible all day, and at night you finally feel the full weight of it. You act fine, you move forward, but inside, there's still grief for versions of life that never happened, for people who changed, for moments that ended before you were ready. But here's what matters. Those memories aren't commands, they're echoes. They sound loud in the quiet, but they don't control where you're going. They don't erase the fact that you survived them, They don't cancel the future you haven't lived yet. If it hurts, that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you felt deeply. It means something mattered to you. And caring isn't something to be ashamed of even when it leaves scars. So breathe. Let the night pass. You won't always feel like this, and one day the quiet won't feel so heavy anymore. There's a certain kind of loneliness that only shows up at night. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from remembering when you weren't. When someone used to be a constant, a voice you could reach for without thinking, a presence that made the quiet feel safe instead of heavy. At night, you realize how much space they used to fill. Now that space just exists, unoccupied, untouched. You don't want to fill it with anyone else because it doesn't feel right yet. So you sit with it, even though it aches. Your mind starts drifting into the what-ifs. What if I had said things differently? What if I stayed quiet instead of reacting? What if I left sooner? What if I tried harder? You run through 100 alternate endings, knowing none of them change reality, but somehow your brain keeps trying anyway. That's the trap of nighttime thinking. It convinces you that if you replay the past enough times, you'll finally find peace in it. But peace doesn't live there anymore. All that's left are lessons and memories, and sometimes even those feel too loud. You start feeling behind in life, like everyone else is moving forward while you're stuck unpacking things you never asked to carry. You scroll through your phone, watching people live, love, laugh, post highlights, and you wonder why your heart feels so heavy when everyone else seems fine. But comparison at night is dangerous. You're seeing everyone else's daylight while you're stuck in your midnight, and that will always feel unfair. What you don't see is how many people are lying awake just like you, staring at ceilings, replaying moments, trying to make peace with things that didn't turn out the way they hoped. You're not broken for feeling this way. You're processing, you're grieving, you're letting go in real time, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. And slowly, very slowly, these nights will change. They won't disappear, but they won't crush you either. The memories will still come, but they won't steal your breath. The quiet will start feeling less empty and more calm. You won't always feel haunted by the past. One night, you'll realize you're thinking about tomorrow instead of yesterday. Eventually, you start noticing that the nights don't hit the same every time. Some nights still hurt, yeah, but other nights feel quieter in a different way. Not empty, just still. And that's when you realize something is slowly shifting inside you, even if you didn't notice it during the day. You begin to understand that missing someone doesn't always mean you want them back. Sometimes it just means they were part of a chapter that mattered. A chapter that shaped you. And endings like that don't disappear quietly. They linger, they echo, not because you're stuck, but because you lived it fully. At night, you start reflecting less on them and more on yourself, on how much you've changed since then, on how certain things you tolerated before you'd never accept now, on how some versions of you had to break so newer ones could exist. And that realization is bittersweet, because growth often comes wrapped in loss. You realize that the pain isn't pointless. It taught you boundaries. It taught you what effort looks like when it's real. It taught you how to spot the difference between attention and intention. Those lessons didn't come cheap. They weren't wasted either. There are still moments when the past creeps in unannounced, and a random thought tightens your chest for a second. But now, you don't spiral the way you used to. You acknowledge it, let it pass. You don't punish yourself for remembering. You don't shame yourself for caring, and that's progress. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? You start asking, what did this teach me? And that question changes everything. The nights don't feel like battles anymore. They feel like checkpoints. Moments where you check in with yourself, where you realize how far you've come even if you still have a long way to go. And one day, you'll lie in bed and realize your thoughts aren't pulling you backward anymore. They're just passing through. And for the first time in a while, the quiet won't feel heavy. It'll feel earned. There's a point where the night stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a mirror. Not one that judges you, but one that shows you who you've become. You're not the same person you were back then. You don't react the same. You don't attach the same. You don't give pieces of yourself away as easily. And while part of you misses that softness, another part of you is grateful you learned how to protect it. You start realizing that healing isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up all at once. It happens in quiet moments like this, when you choose not to spiral, when you choose not to reach out, when you choose to sit with your feelings instead of running from them. Those small decisions stack up, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. Some nights you'll still feel that ache, that sense of loss, but it won't feel like panic anymore. It'll feel like a reminder that you loved something real, reminder that you're capable of depth. And instead of breaking you, that thought will start to ground you. You'll also start noticing how much space you've created. Space in your mind, space in your heart, space in your life. At first, that space felt terrifying, like something was missing. Now it starts to feel like potential, like room for something healthier, something calmer, something that doesn't require you to lose sleep just to feel secure. You begin trusting yourself again, trusting that you can handle whatever comes next, trusting that even if something ends, you won't fall apart the way you once did. You've already proven that to yourself night after night just by getting through. And that's the part people don't see. They don't see the growth that happens in silence. They don't see the strength it takes to sit with your thoughts and still choose to move forward. But you know, and that's enough. The night won't always feel like this. One day it'll just be night. No wait, no replay, just rest. At some point, you stop fighting the memories when they show up. You don't chase them, but you don't shove them away either. You let them pass through like background noise instead of letting them take over the whole room. That's when you realize you're not healing by force anymore. You're healing by acceptance. You accept that some nights will still feel heavier than others, that certain dates, certain places, certain songs will still stir something inside you. But now, those moments don't define your entire mood. Don't steal the whole night. They're just moments, and moments pass. You also start understanding that the past isn't trying to pull you back, just reminding you that you lived, that you felt something real, that you weren't numb, and there's something powerful about that, because numbness is easy. Feeling is brave. You stop asking yourself if you'll ever fully move on. That question slowly loses importance. Instead, you start asking, am I okay right now? And most nights, the answer becomes yes. Not perfect, not amazing, but okay. And that's enough. You notice how your thoughts begin drifting toward things ahead of you. Plans, goals, small things you're looking forward to. First, it surprises you. Like, when did my mind start doing this? But that's how healing works. It sneaks up on you, one quiet night at a time. And even when the past visits, it doesn't feel like a threat anymore. It feels like a chapter you've already read. One that mattered. One that changed you. Not one you need to reread every night to understand. You're learning how to rest without carrying everything with you, how to sleep without replaying endings, how to let the present exist without being overshadowed by what's already gone, and that's progress. Whether you recognize it yet or not, there's a quiet confidence that starts forming in you after all those nights. It doesn't come from feeling happy all the time. It comes from knowing you can sit with discomfort and still be okay. You've already faced the worst parts of your thoughts in the dark, and they didn't destroy you. That realization changes how you move through life. You stop being afraid of the quiet. Silence doesn't feel like abandonment anymore. It feels neutral, sometimes even comforting. You don't need constant noise or validation to feel grounded. You've learned how to be alone without feeling lonely, and that's something a lot of people never figure out. You also become more honest with yourself about what you want, about what you won't tolerate again, about the kind of connections you deserve. The nights taught you that chasing what's gone only keeps you stuck, and protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. And when you think back on the people you missed, the pain isn't as sharp. There's still tenderness there, but it's softer now, less like a wound and more like a scar. Proof that something happened, but also proof that it healed. You start trusting that life doesn't end with one loss, that the world doesn't stop because something did. You realize that endings don't erase everything that came before them, and they don't block everything that comes after. They just redirect you, and one night, without any dramatic moment, you'll notice something small but important. You're tired in a normal way, not emotionally drained, not overwhelmed, just ready to rest. And as you close your eyes, you won't feel haunted, you'll feel present, and then one night, it doesn't hurt anymore. Not in the way it used to. You still remember, but the memories don't grip your chest. They don't steal your breath. They don't pull you backwards. They just exist quietly like old photographs stored away instead of wounds left open. You realize you didn't get over it all at once. You outgrew it slowly, night by night, thought by thought. You kept living even when it was hard. You kept choosing yourself even when part of you wanted to stay stuck in what was familiar. And without noticing, you built something stronger than closure. You built resilience. The nights that once felt unbearable became lessons. They taught you how to sit with yourself, how to listen instead of run, how to accept endings without needing them to make sense. And because of that, you're not afraid of feeling anymore. You're not afraid of caring. You're not afraid of loving again when the time is right. You understand now that pain doesn't mean you failed. It means you were present. It means you opened your heart in a world that doesn't always know how to hold it gently, and that's not something to regret, that's something to respect. Past no longer defines you, it informs you, it shaped you, but it doesn't own you. You carry it with wisdom now, not weight. In the quiet you once feared, it's become peace. So if tonight feels heavy, remember this. You won't always feel like this. You are moving forward even when it doesn't feel obvious. And one day you'll look back at these nights and realize they didn't break you. They built you. Maybe I'm not hard to love. Maybe I'm just not someone people stay for. Because they come close, they get attached, they say they care, they act invested, and then something shifts. They pull back, they get unsure, they choose easier. And after it happens enough times, you stop blaming timing. You start blaming yourself. You start wondering if you're good for the moment, but not for the long term. If you're exciting, but not secure. If you're lovable, but not keepable. And that thought sits heavy because being left doesn't just hurt your heart, it makes you question your value. When almost relationships keep happening, your brain starts building a story, a quiet one. It says, people like you, but they don't stay. And once that narrative forms, everything starts filtering through it. If someone takes longer to reply, you assume they're losing interest. If someone pulls back slightly, you assume it's the beginning of the end. Because you've seen this pattern before, you've felt the slow fade, the shift in tone, the subtle detachment. So now even when something feels good, you brace yourself. Not because you're negative, because you're tired of being surprised. And the scary part, you start expecting abandonment before it even happens. You hold back. You don't get too excited. You don't fully relax because deep down, you're preparing for them to leave. Not because you're unlovable, but because repetition turned into belief. Fully relax into the connection. Because fully relax into the connection. Because what's the point if it's temporary anyway? You become hyper-aware, watching for changes, tracking energy shifts, reading into silence, and sometimes, without realizing it, you create distance first. You pull back slightly, you act less invested, you test their consistency, not to play games, but to protect yourself, because if they're gonna leave, you'd rather see it coming. But here's the hard truth. When you show up guarded, you don't give love the chance to feel safe. Not because you're toxic, not because you're difficult, but because you're tired. Tired of being surprised, tired of being left, tired of being the one who cares more. So you half show up, and then when it ends, it feels like confirmation. See? They left again. But maybe it's not that you're someone people don't stay for. Maybe it's that you're still healing from the last time they didn't. There's a difference between being left and choosing people who were never built to stay. That's the part we don't always see, because when someone walks away, it feels personal. It feels like they evaluated you and decided you weren't enough. But look closer. Were they consistent from the start? Were they clear about their intentions? Were they emotionally available or just present? Sometimes the pattern isn't that you're not worth staying for. It's that you keep giving your depth to people who only plan to visit. People who like connection but fear commitment. People who enjoy intimacy but avoid responsibility. And when they leave, it reinforces the narrative. No one stays. But maybe the better question is, who have I been choosing? Because when you stop choosing emotionally unavailable people, the pattern changes. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually. You realize you were never hard to stay for, you were just staying with people who were temporary. At some point, you stop chasing permanence, you stop trying to lock something in before it's solid, stop over-investing just to make it last, stop forcing potential into commitment because you realize something. You can't convince someone to stay. You can't love someone into being ready. You can't perform your way into permanence. So instead of gripping tighter, you loosen your hold. You let people show you who they are. You stop rushing labels. Stop fantasizing futures before foundations exist. And something interesting happens when you're no longer desperate for someone to stay. You start attracting people who actually want to. Because permanence isn't built through pressure, it's built through alignment. You don't chase it, you allow it. And when someone stays without being forced, without being convinced, without being chased, it feels different. Not fragile, not uncertain, just steady. At some point, the fear shifts. It stops being, they're going to leave, and becomes, if they do, I'll be okay. That's confidence, not the loud kind, not the I don't care kind. The steady kind. You stop gripping so tightly. You stop overanalyzing every shift. You stop trying to secure permanence too early because you know this. If someone stays, it's because they want to, not because you convinced them, not because you performed perfectly, not because you minimized yourself. And if they leave, it doesn't collapse your identity. It doesn't confirm you're unworthy. It just confirms they weren't aligned. You're not scared of people leaving anymore. You're more concerned with whether they're capable of staying, and that's different because now you're not auditioning, you're observing, and the people who are meant to stay, they won't need to be chased, they won't need to be monitored, they won't need to be reminded, they'll just stay. Being someone people stay for starts with staying true to yourself first, because when you abandon yourself to keep someone else, you teach them that you'll tolerate instability, you over-adjust, over-forgive, overextend, you bend your boundaries so they don't feel pressured, you silence your needs so they don't feel overwhelmed, and slowly, you're the one disappearing. But here's the shift. The more you stay grounded in who you are, the less you attract people who only plan to pass through. When you communicate clearly, when you hold your standards calmly, when you don't chase mixed signals, the wrong people leave faster. And that's not loss, that's filtering. You don't become someone people stay for by shrinking yourself into convenience. You become that by being steady in your worth. The right person won't stay because you made it easy. They'll stay because they respect what you stand on. The right love doesn't feel like survival. It doesn't feel like holding your breath. It doesn't feel like waiting for the other shoe to drop. It doesn't feel like constantly proving you're worth keeping. It feels stable, not boring, not forced, stable. You're not overthinking every text. You're not tracking effort. You're not wondering if today is the day they change their mind. You just feel secure, and that's what you've been craving this whole time. Not obsession, not intensity, not dramatic passion, stability. Because when someone is truly staying, you don't have to fight for reassurance. You don't have to shrink. You don't have to overperform. You don't have to prepare for abandonment. You get to relax. And if you've never experienced that, of course, you start thinking maybe you're not someone people stay for, but maybe you've just never been with someone capable of stable love. There's a difference. At some point, you stop fearing being left. You start expecting to be valued. That's the real shift. You don't walk into connections thinking, how long will this last? You walk in thinking, if this is aligned, it will stay. You stop preparing for abandonment. Stop bracing for the slow fade. Stop assuming you'll have to fight to be kept, because now you know something. If someone leaves, it doesn't mean you weren't worth staying for. It means they weren't built to stay. And instead of internalizing it, you let it pass. You don't collapse. You don't spiral. You don't rewrite your worth. You understand that being valued is the bare minimum. And once you truly believe that, you stop entertaining anything less. You don't chase clarity. You don't beg for reassurance. You don't accept confusion. You expect effort. You expect consistency. You expect intention. And the people who can't offer that, they filter themselves out. So, am I just not someone people stay for? No, I just stopped staying where I'm not valued. There's a difference. For a long time, I thought people leaving was proof that I wasn't enough, not interesting enough, not secure enough, not worth committing to long term. But now I see it clearly. The wrong people didn't stay because they were never meant to build. They were meant to teach. Teach me what inconsistency feels like. Teach me what mixed signals look like. Teach me what I will never accept again. And once you learn that, you stop chasing permanence. You stop trying to be easier. You stop overproving. You stop bending yourself into something digestible. Because you realize this. You are absolutely someone people stay for. Just not people who are unsure, not people who love halfway, not people who need options. The right person won't need convincing. They won't need time to decide your worth. They won't feel overwhelmed by your depth. They'll feel steady. And this time, if someone leaves, you won't question your value. You'll question their capacity, because you're no longer asking, well, why don't people stay? You're asking, are they capable of staying at my level? And that's the shift. You keep ignoring the red flags because all you want is love, not peace, not respect, not consistency, just love. You see the signs, you see the unanswered calls, the constant busy, the way you're always an option, never a priority. And instead of asking why it hurts, you ask how to endure it. You tell yourself it's patience, that it's loyalty, that love means staying even when it costs you. But let's be honest, she doesn't check on you. She doesn't consider your feelings. She doesn't show up the way you do. And you know that. You just don't want to face what it says about you for staying. So here's the real question you've been avoiding. How much do you actually love yourself? Because when you stay in situations that keep hurting you, when you keep accepting disrespect just to feel close to someone, that's not love. That's neglect. If you truly loved yourself, you wouldn't keep choosing pain just to feel wanted. You wouldn't keep lowering your standards to keep someone around who clearly isn't choosing you back. But you don't protect yourself, you sacrifice yourself. Because being alone scares you more than being hurt. And that's why you accept the bare minimum. That's why you stay in toxic cycles. That's why you confuse attachment with love. You're not holding on because it's good for you. You're holding on because it's the only version of love you think you deserve. And that's the lie. You don't need someone else to complete you. What you actually need is to stop outsourcing your worth. Because the moment you start loving yourself, really loving yourself, you stop begging for attention. You stop tolerating disrespect. You stop calling pain connection. You stop chasing people who only show up halfway. Self-love doesn't make you selfish. It makes you unavailable to anything that keeps breaking you. And until you learn that, you'll keep calling suffering love and calling survival loyalty. You are worth more than crumbs. You are worth more than confusion. You are worth more than being an option. But no one can convince you of that until you decide to believe it yourself. Here's the truth you keep avoiding. You don't stay because you don't see the red flags. You stay because you think leaving means nobody else will love you, so you make excuses. She's busy. She's going through stuff. She just doesn't show love the same way. But effort isn't a love language. It's a choice. And when someone keeps choosing not to show up for you, that's not confusion, that's clarity. You're not being patient. You're being hopeful in a place that's already shown you who it is. You keep giving grace to people who wouldn't give you the same. You keep explaining your pain to someone who already decided it wasn't important enough to change. And every time you stay, you send yourself a message. My feelings come second. My needs are optional. This is the best I can get. That's not love. That's self-betrayal. You think walking away means losing them, but what you're really losing right now is respect for yourself, because someone who values you doesn't make you question your worth. They don't make you beg for consistency. They don't disappear and call it space. And the reason this keeps happening isn't because you love too hard. It's because you don't love yourself hard enough to leave when you should. The moment you start choosing yourself, red flags stop looking like obstacles and start looking like exits. And exits aren't failures, they're protection. Ignoring red flags doesn't just hurt you once, it trains people how to treat you. Every time you stay after disrespect, you teach them you'll tolerate it. Every time you forgive without change, you show them your boundaries don't mean much, and they adjust accordingly. They respond less. They try less, they care just enough to keep you around, but never enough to show up fully. Because why would they? You already proved you'll stay without effort. You think you're being understanding, but what you're really doing is normalizing behavior that shouldn't have access to you. You answer late replies immediately. You accept apologies without accountability. You let patterns repeat because you're afraid of starting over, and slowly, your standards drop while their comfort rises. That's the trade you're making. You're giving someone emotional safety while you live in emotional uncertainty. And the worst part? You start blaming yourself. You tell yourself you're asking for too much, that you're sensitive, that this is just how relationships are. But healthy love doesn't require endurance. You don't have to survive it. You don't have to fight for basic respect. You don't have to convince someone to treat you well. Red flags aren't challenges to overcome. They're warnings to listen to, and the longer you ignore them, the harder it becomes to remember what being valued even feels like. The pattern doesn't break when they change, it breaks when you do. The reason you keep ignoring red flags is because you confuse attachment with love. Love feels steady, attachment feels urgent. Love doesn't make you anxious. Attachment keeps you checking your phone, replaying conversations, wondering where you stand, and you call that passion. But what you're really feeling is fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough, fear that if you don't hold on tight, you'll be forgotten. So you cling, you stay when you should leave, you wait when there's nothing coming, you accept excuses because they're easier than facing the truth. That truth being, someone who wants you won't make you feel optional. Attachment makes you chase because it needs reassurance. Love doesn't chase, it meets. And until you learn the difference, every red flag will feel like something you just need to work through. You'll keep calling distance space, disrespect miscommunication, inconsistency timing, but your body already knows that tight feeling in your chest, that constant unease, that feeling of giving more than you're getting. That's not love warning you to try harder. That's your self-respect telling you to stop. You don't need clearer signs. You don't need closure. You don't need one more conversation. You need the courage to admit that attachment is keeping you stuck in places love would never ask you to stay. Walking away feels harder than staying because staying lets you avoid the truth. As long as you're still there, you can tell yourself it might change, that maybe tomorrow they'll care more, that maybe you're just being tested. Hope keeps you stuck because leaving means admitting you invested in something that wasn't good for you. It means admitting you ignored your instincts, that you stayed longer than you should have, that you loved someone who couldn't meet you halfway, and that hurts your pride. So instead, you endure. You tell yourself pain is temporary, that love requires sacrifice, that every relationship has rough patches, but here's the part you don't want to hear. Love doesn't consistently make you feel small. It doesn't drain you. It doesn't confuse you. It doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by wanting basic respect. You stay because leaving forces accountability, not for them, but for you. It forces you to ask why you accepted less, why you ignored the signs, why you stayed quiet when your boundaries were crossed. And that's uncomfortable. But staying is costing you more than leaving ever will. Every day you remain in a situation that disrespects you, you reinforce the belief that this is all you deserve, and that belief is the real damage. Walking away isn't giving up on love, it's giving up on self-betrayal. And the moment you finally choose yourself, red flags stop feeling confusing. They feel obvious. The moment you stop ignoring red flags, everything gets quiet. No chaos, no anxiety spikes, no constant checking to see if someone still wants you. And at first, that silence feels uncomfortable because you're used to confusion, used to emotional ups and downs, used to love feeling like something you have to manage. So when you finally walk away, your brain starts questioning you. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should have stayed. Maybe this is just how love feels. But that's just withdrawal. You're not missing them. You're missing the familiarity of the pattern because ignoring red flags wasn't just about them. It was about what you were willing to tolerate to avoid being alone. Now that you've chosen yourself, you start seeing things clearly. You realize how drained you were, how often you made excuses, how little you were actually asking for compared to how much you were giving, and that clarity changes you. You don't feel pulled toward inconsistency anymore. You don't chase mixed signals. You don't feel tempted by people who only show up halfway. Because once you experience peace, chaos stops feeling exciting. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop believing love has to hurt. You stop confusing anxiety with connection. And here's the biggest shift. You stop trying to be chosen. You start choosing. Who gets access to you? Who gets your time? Who gets your emotional energy? Red flags don't feel like puzzles anymore. They feel like answers. And instead of asking me, can I make this work? You ask, does this protect me? That's when self-respect kicks in. Not loud, not dramatic, just firm. When you stop ignoring red flags, people from your past don't recognize you anymore. Not because you changed for the worse, but because you stopped being convenient. You don't explain yourself as much. You don't over-justify your boundaries. You don't stay in conversations that feel disrespectful or draining, and that confuses people. They're used to the version of you that stayed quiet, that gave chances, that tried to understand at the expense of being understood. So when you walk away faster now, they call you cold. They say you've changed. They say you're doing too much. But what they really mean is, you're no longer available for the dynamic they benefited from. People who thrived on your tolerance don't like your standards. People who were comfortable with your silence don't like your clarity. And that's okay, because growth isn't about being liked, it's about being protected. You're not harsh, you're not bitter, you're not closed off. You're just done negotiating your self-respect. You no longer wait for disrespect to become unbearable before leaving. You don't need proof anymore. The first pattern is enough. And here's the part that matters most. The right people won't question this version of you. They won't push your boundaries. They won't test your tolerance. They won't need you to over-explain. They'll feel your standards and meet them naturally. Anyone who leaves because you stopped accepting red flags was never meant to stay anyway. That's not loss, that's alignment. Self-respect feels lonely at first, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you stopped tolerating what everyone else normalized. You don't have constant access to people anymore. You don't have drama to distract you. You don't have half connections keeping you entertained. And that quiet can feel heavy, because for a long time, chaos made you feel needed, inconsistency made you feel chosen, fixing things made you feel valuable. Now none of that is there, and your brain tries to convince you that you're missing out, that maybe you were happier when you stayed, that maybe standards are overrated, that maybe being lonely is worse than being disrespected. But that's just the adjustment period. You're unlearning a pattern where love had to hurt to feel real. Self-respect strips away the noise and leaves you with truth. You start seeing how many connections were built on convenience instead of care. How many people stayed because you made it easy for them, not because they valued you. And yes, that realization stings, but it also gives you something you didn't have before. Peace, no guessing, no waiting, no emotional whiplash, just clarity. And from that clarity, your standards get quieter but stronger. You don't announce them, you don't defend them, you just live by them. And anyone who can't meet you there falls away naturally. Loneliness isn't punishment here. It's space to rebuild your sense of worth without someone else validating it, space to remember who you are when you're not chasing or fixing or proving, and soon, that loneliness turns into confidence. Not loud confidence, stable confidence, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that doesn't beg, the kind that knows red flags aren't obstacles, they're directions. At some point, you realize something uncomfortable. You don't actually miss them. You miss the version of yourself that kept trying to be enough. You miss the effort you gave, the hope you held on to, the belief that if you just loved harder, things would finally change because chasing gave you purpose. It made your pain feel meaningful. It made waiting feel justified. It made disappointment feel like part of the process. Now that you've stopped, there's nothing left to fix. And that's when the grief shows up. You grieve the time you spent trying to earn what should have been given freely. You grieve the energy you poured into people who never poured back. You grieve the patience you mistook for love, not because you were foolish, but because you cared. And it hurts to admit that caring didn't save anything. You start seeing clearly how often you ignored your own voice, how many times your body told you to leave while your heart begged you to stay. You stayed loyal to people who weren't loyal to your peace, and that realization is heavy, because now you can't go back, you can't unsee the patterns, you can't pretend disrespect was accidental. You can't convince yourself that red flags were just misunderstandings. You've outgrown the version of you that survived on hope alone, and while that growth is necessary, it still feels like loss. But here's the truth: you didn't lose something real. You let go of something that only existed because you kept tolerating it. And the more distance you get, the clearer it becomes. What you were missing wasn't love, it was self-respect. Ignoring red flags was never about love, it was about not wanting to choose yourself. Because choosing yourself meant walking away without guarantees, without reassurance, without someone else filling the silence, so you stayed. You told yourself love takes patience, that people need time, that your pain was just part of the process, but deep down, you knew the truth. You weren't staying because it felt right. You were staying because leaving felt terrifying. Terrifying to be alone, terrifying to admit you deserved better, terrifying to sit with the idea that you chose someone who couldn't choose you back, though you ignored the signs. Not because you didn't see them, but because seeing them meant action, and action meant accountability. But here's what finally clicks: red flags don't hurt you, ignoring them does. Every time you stayed, you taught yourself that your needs were optional. Every time you excused behavior, you taught yourself that love should be endured. Every time you waited for change, you delayed your own growth. And that cycle doesn't end when someone finally treats you right. It ends when you stop accepting what treats you wrong. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop wanting love. It means you stop betraying yourself just to keep it. It means you walk away sooner. You trust discomfort. You listen the first time something feels off. Not because you're cold, but because you're done confusing pain with connection. And once you reach this point, red flags don't feel complicated anymore. They feel clear. You don't argue with them. You don't negotiate with them. You don't try to turn them green. You leave because now you understand something you didn't before. Being alone is temporary, self-betrayal is cumulative, and you're no longer willing to pay that price. That's not bitterness, that's self-respect, and that's where the cycle finally ends. She said she needed space, and I believed her, because when someone says that, you don't question it, you respect it. You tell yourself they're overwhelmed, they're figuring things out, they just need time to clear their head. So I gave her that. I didn't chase, I didn't pressure her, I didn't try to force conversations that she clearly wasn't ready to have. I stepped back, because in my head, that's what you do when you care about someone. You don't make things harder for them, you give them room. But what I didn't realize at the time was this: she didn't need space, she just didn't want me. At first I handled it the way you're supposed to. I gave her distance, I stopped texting first, I stopped trying to keep conversations alive, I let the silence sit, even when it didn't feel right, because I thought space meant something temporary, like a pause, like something we would come back from. But the silence started stretching longer than it should have, and instead of clarity, it just created confusion, because when someone genuinely needs space, they don't disappear without direction. They don't leave you guessing. They don't make you feel like you're suddenly a stranger. But that's exactly how it started to feel. And deep down, something didn't sit right. Not because I didn't trust her, but because the energy didn't match what she said. Then little things started adding up. Things I didn't notice right away. But once I did, I couldn't ignore them. She wasn't just taking space. She was still active, still talking, still posting, still present, just not with me. And that's when the confusion turned into something else: clarity. Because space doesn't mean disappearing from one person while still being available for everything else. Space doesn't look like selective silence. And that's when it hit me. She didn't need space from everything. She needed space from me. That realization is different, because now it's not about understanding, it's about acceptance. You start replaying everything, trying to figure out when it changed, when her energy shifted, when the connection stopped being something she wanted to maintain. Because if it was really about space, she would have come back, she would have explained, she would have made it clear where things stood, but she didn't. She just faded and let the silence say what she didn't want to say directly. And the truth is, space is one of the easiest ways to leave without saying you're leaving. It sounds soft, it sounds understandable, it doesn't create conflict, but sometimes it's just distance in disguise, a way to slowly step out without having to take responsibility for ending it. And I didn't want to see it like that at first, because believing her felt easier than accepting what was actually happening. Because if I accepted it, then I had to admit something I wasn't ready for, that I wasn't someone she was trying to hold on to. I was someone she was slowly letting go of. And that's a different kind of pain, because it's quiet. There's no argument, no clear ending, just distance that keeps growing until you finally understand what it means. For a while I kept thinking she'd come back, that once she had her space, things would go back to how they were, because when something feels real, you don't expect it to end like that. You expect a conversation, closure, something, but sometimes the absence is the answer. And that's what I had to learn the hard way. And once I stopped waiting, everything started making more sense, because I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't questioning where I stood. I wasn't trying to interpret silence. I just saw it for what it was. She didn't need time. She made a decision, just not one she wanted to say out loud. And yeah, that hurts. Not just because she left, but because of how she did it. Because honesty would have been easier to respect, clarity would have been easier to accept, but instead, I was left trying to understand something that was never explained, and that kind of ending stays with you for a while. So yeah, she said she needed space, but what she really needed was distance from me, and now I understand something clearly. The right person doesn't disappear to figure out if they want you. They don't leave you in silence, they don't make you question everything. They communicate, they stay, they choose. So next time, I won't confuse silence with patience. I won't wait around for someone who already stepped away, because when someone truly wants you, they don't need space to decide it. I don't care how corny it sounds. I'm not going to stop being a lover, not until I get the kind of love I've always imagined. The kind where there's no confusion, no wandering attention, no half-interest disguised as effort, just one person, and a world that feels smaller because of it. I want love where focus doesn't drift, where nobody else even registers, where loving them feels instinctive, not forced. The kind of love that doesn't try to be cinematic, it just is. Two people driving with no destination, standing in open fields, traveling for no reason other than wanting to be together. The kind of love you don't just feel in your chest, you feel it in your soul, hot, intense, alive. And I don't understand how people walk around pretending that kind of love doesn't matter. Like love is casual, like attachment is embarrassing, like caring deeply is something you should hide, because love is everything. It's sharing the world with someone, learning their habits, reading their moods, knowing them in ways no one else does. It's going from stranger to someone you can't imagine life without. And yeah, love comes with risk, heartbreak, loss, pain, but I'm here for all of it. Because if that's the price of loving deeply, I'll pay it. I'll take the uncertainty, I'll take the scars, I'll take the ache that comes with caring. What makes it hard sometimes isn't loving deeply, it's loving deeply in a world that pretends not to care. People act like being attached is weak, like wanting someone fully is desperate. They call it being nonchalant. They call it cool. They call it protecting yourself. But to me, it just feels empty. I don't want love that's casual. I don't want half interest. I don't want to pretend I wouldn't be devastated if I lost someone I truly cared about. I want to feel it, all of it. I want the kind of love where my heart is completely in, no exits, no backups, no pretending. And yeah, that makes me vulnerable. It means I get hurt easier. It means I feel things more intensely, but I'd rather feel everything than live numb just to look unbothered. Because loving deeply isn't weakness, it's courage. It takes guts to say, I want you fully. I'm choosing you. I'm not scared to care. And maybe that's why it feels lonely sometimes, because not everyone is built to love like that. Some people close their hearts after pain, others keep theirs open, not because they're naive, but because they refuse to let disappointment turn them cold. You don't love deeply because it's easy, you love deeply because it's who you are, and even when it costs you, you'd still rather feel everything than live a life that feels hollow. You already know how this can end. You know love can break you. You know it can leave scars. You know it can take pieces you don't get back. And still, you choose it. Not because you're reckless, not because you're desperate, but because a life without love feels smaller than a life with heartbreak. You're not chasing perfection. You're chasing connection. The kind that makes ordinary moments feel alive. The kind that makes the world feel louder and quieter at the same time. And once you've felt even a glimpse of that, you can't pretend you don't want it anymore. So yeah, you risk it again, you open your heart again, you believe again, not because you forgot the pain, but because you decided it wasn't stronger than your capacity to love. Being a lover boy doesn't mean you ignore reality, it means you face it and still choose love anyway. You're not asking for perfection, you're asking for presence, for a love that feels mutual, chosen, clear. And wanting that doesn't make you unrealistic, it makes you honest. Because once you know how deeply you can love, you stop settling for anything that asks you to dim that fire. So, no, the lover boy in you isn't dying, he's just waiting. And when the right love finally arrives, he'll be ready. What people don't realize is how much strength it takes to stay soft in a world that rewards detachment. It's easier to act unbothered, easier to keep things light, easier to pretend you don't care that much, but you were never built that way. You don't love halfway, you don't feel quietly. When you care, it shows in your effort, in your loyalty, and how present you are. And that's exactly what people try to shame out of you. They tell you you're too much, too attached, too intense. Like love is something you're supposed to ration. So sometimes you wonder if you should change, if caring less would protect you, if closing off would finally make things easier. But every time you try, it feels wrong, because pretending not to care cost you more than heartbreak ever did. You don't want to love where you're constantly monitoring yourself, where you have to downplay your feelings to seem cool. You want to love where effort isn't embarrassing, where loyalty isn't laughed at, where wanting someone fully isn't treated like a flaw. And yes, that kind of love is rare, not because it doesn't exist, but because not everyone has the capacity for it. Some people love with caution, some love with conditions, some love with one foot out the door. You love with your whole chest, and that means when it ends, it hurts differently. You don't just lose a person, you lose the future you already pictured, the version of yourself that only existed with them. But even after that pain, you don't harden, you don't turn cold, you don't become bitter, you grieve, and then you stay open. Not because you're naive, but because you understand something others don't. Love isn't dangerous, avoidance is. A life spent protecting yourself from ever being hurt is a life spent never being fully alive. So you keep choosing love, even when it costs you, even when it scares you. Because being a lover was never about guarantees, it was about courage. And no matter how many times the world tells you to be smaller, to care less, to guard your heart, you don't. Because the lover boy in you knows one truth: a heart that can love deeply is never something to be ashamed of. People who love like you often feel out of place, not because there's something wrong with them, but because the world isn't built for hearts that don't know how to love halfway. You walk into spaces where everyone is guarding themselves, where effort is calculated, where caring too much is treated like a mistake you should have learned from by now. And you can feel it, the hesitation, the emotional distance, the way people keep one foot out the door just in case. Meanwhile, you're standing there ready to choose someone fully if they'd just meet you halfway. That contrast can feel isolating. You start wondering if you're outdated, if your way of loving belongs to another time, another kind of world, because it feels like everyone else is playing it safe while you're still willing to risk your heart, and that makes you stand out. not loudly, but deeply. You don't bond casually, you don't talk just to fill silence. When you connect, you notice things others miss, you remember details people forget, you show up in ways that don't disappear easily, and that kind of presence can be uncomfortable for people who aren't ready to be seen that closely. So they pull back, they joke about you caring too much, they call your intensity a lot, not because it is, but because they don't know how to match it. That's the part that hurts, realizing you're not too much, you're just too deep for people who only know how to skim the surface. You don't want love that feels convenient, you want love that feels intentional. You don't want someone who chooses you when it's easy. You want someone who chooses you because they mean it. And yeah, that narrows the field. It means you'll feel alone sometimes. It means you'll walk away more than you stay. It means you won't fit everywhere. But fitting everywhere was never the goal. The longing was. The lover boy in you isn't broken because he doesn't blend in. He just hasn't found the place where his kind of love is spoken fluently. And when he does, it won't feel like standing out anymore. It'll feel like coming home. Loving this deeply almost always comes with loneliness first. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because alignment takes time. When you love with your whole heart, you don't rush into anything just to feel chosen. You don't settle for attention that fades. You don't accept half presence just to avoid being alone. And that means there are stretches where it feels like everyone else has someone and you don't. You watch people pair up quickly, jump from connection to connection, call it love because it fills the space, and sometimes you wonder if you're being too patient, too selective, too unwilling to compromise. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of being half-loved. You don't want a relationship that feels like constant self-editing, where you have to mute your feelings, where your intensity is treated like a problem instead of a gift. So you wait, not passively, intentionally. You keep your heart open, but your standards intact. And that's the lonely part no one talks about. Choosing alignment over company, choosing depth over distraction, choosing to sit with the emptiness rather than fill it with something that won't last. Some nights it feels heavy. You question whether it's worth it, whether anyone will ever meet you at the level you're willing to love. But then you remember something important. The love you want can't be rushed. It needs two people who aren't scared of closeness, who don't joke about vulnerability, who don't treat commitment like a trap. And until that shows up, being alone is still safer than shrinking yourself. The lover boy in you isn't lonely because he's lacking. He's lonely because he's waiting for something real. And real love doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives aligned. The lover boy gets misunderstood a lot. People look at the way you love and assume it comes from neediness, from insecurity, from not knowing how to be alone. But that's never been true. You don't love deeply because you're afraid of being by yourself. You love deeply because you know how to be alone and still choose connection. There's a difference. You're not reaching for someone to fill a void. You're reaching because you want to share a life you already know how to carry on your own. But in a world obsessed with detachment, depth gets mislabeled, caring becomes too much, consistency becomes clingy, wanting clarity becomes pressure, so people tell you to chill, to play it cool, to act like you don't care as much as you do. And for a while you try. You soften your words, you hold back your feelings, you pretend you're less invested than your heart actually is. But it never feels right. Because loving quietly when you feel loudly starts to feel like lying to yourself. You don't want to be mysterious. You don't want to be distant. You don't want to be someone who treats love like a game of leverage. You want honesty. You want effort that isn't embarrassing. Commitment that isn't mocked. Connection that doesn't require you to minimize who you are. And the truth is, people who can't handle that were never going to meet you where you stand anyway. They confuse emotional availability with weakness because they've never felt safe enough to offer it themselves. So they pull away, they joke, they keep things light, not because you're too much, but because your depth asks them to be real. And not everyone is ready for that. The lover boy isn't misunderstood because he loves wrong. He's misunderstood because he loves honestly in a world that prefers control. And one day, someone won't ask you to tone it down. They won't call your care extra. They won't flinch at your intensity. They'll recognize it because they've been looking for someone who loves like you, without fear, without games, without holding back. One thing people get wrong about you is thinking you lose yourself in love, that you disappear, that you abandon who you are, just keep someone close. But that's not what loving deeply means to you. You don't give your heart away blindly. You give it intentionally. You're aware of the risk. You feel the fear. You know exactly how much it can hurt, and you still choose to love, not because you don't value yourself, but because you refuse to live guarded out of fear. There's a difference between protecting your heart and closing it. Closing it is pretending you don't care. Protecting it is knowing when to walk away without turning cold. And that's something you had to learn the hard way. You've loved people who couldn't meet you emotionally, who enjoyed your warmth but never offered shelter in return. And each time you didn't lose your softness, you refined it. You learned to notice effort, to listen to consistency, to believe actions more than potential. You learned that loving deeply doesn't mean tolerating confusion. It doesn't mean waiting forever. It doesn't mean accepting less than what you give. So now you love with boundaries, not walls, boundaries. You stay open, but you don't stay where you feel unseen. You express yourself, but you don't beg to be understood. You give fully, but only where there's room for you. That's growth. The lover boy in you didn't harden, he matured. He learned that protecting his heart doesn't mean dimming his light. It means choosing spaces where that light is welcomed. And that's why when you love again, it won't consume you. It'll expand you, because this time you won't confuse intensity with imbalance. You'll recognize the difference between passion and peace. At some point, you stop mistaking chaos for passion. You stop thinking intensity means confusion. You stop believing love has to feel unstable to feel real. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes after loving people who kept you guessing, after giving effort that wasn't matched, after realizing how tired you were from loving alone in a two-person connection. Because for a long time, you thought love was supposed to feel urgent, heavy, like something you had to fight for. But real reciprocity feels different. It doesn't spike your anxiety. It doesn't make you question your place. It doesn't leave you replaying conversations or wondering if you asked for too much. Mutual love feels calm, not boring, steady. It feels like someone meeting your effort without keeping score, like someone choosing you without needing to be convinced. And at first, that kind of love almost feels unfamiliar, because you're used to proving yourself, used to earning attention, used to being the one who cares more. So when someone shows up consistently, communicates clearly, and doesn't flinch at your depth, your body has to unlearn the chaos. You have to remind yourself that peace doesn't mean lack of passion. It means safety. You don't feel smaller around them. You don't feel like you're too much. You don't feel like you need to dim anything. Your intensity doesn't scare them. It reassures them. And that's when it clicks. Love was never supposed to feel like survival. It was supposed to feel like partnership. The lover boy doesn't stop loving deeply. He just stops loving unevenly. He stops pouring into places that don't pour back. He stops calling inconsistency timing, stops calling confusion chemistry, stops calling bare minimum effort. Because once you've tasted reciprocity, you can't go back. You can't unfeel what it's like to be met where you stand. And that's when loving deeply finally feels light. Loving deeply doesn't disappear. It just becomes selective. After everything you've felt, everything you've learned, you don't stop wanting connection. You stop giving it away too easily. You don't rush anymore, not because you're guarded, but because you understand your capacity. You know how much you give, how present you are, how deeply you attach, and you're careful about where that kind of love lands. That doesn't mean you're closed off. It means you're intentional. You don't entertain mixed signals. You don't romanticize inconsistency. You don't chase potential while ignoring reality. You pay attention now to effort, to follow through, to how someone shows up when things are calm, not just when things are exciting. Because you've learned that real love isn't proven in intensity alone. It's proven in consistency, and the people who are right for you won't be intimidated by that. They won't feel pressured by your depth. They won't joke about you caring too much. They won't need you to shrink to make them comfortable. They'll respect the way you love because they love the same way. That's the shift. You're not asking for more than before. You're just no longer accepting less. You still want closeness, still want loyalty, still want that kind of connection where the world feels quieter because someone chose you fully. But now you're patient with people, not with uncertainty. You're open to love, not to confusion. And that's how the lover boy grows. Not into someone colder, but into someone clearer. Someone who knows that loving deeply isn't about giving your heart to everyone who shows interest. It's about giving it to someone who knows how to hold it. Before the right love shows up, the lover boy is usually alone for a while. Not because he can't find connection, but because he refuses to force it. He's learned what happens when you fill space just to avoid loneliness, how quickly comfort turns into compromise, how easy it is to lose yourself when you accept something that doesn't fully meet you. So he chooses solitude instead, and solitude teaches him things love never could. It shows him who he is without anyone else's expectations, without adjusting his emotions, without holding back his intensity to make someone stay. He learns how to sit with himself, how to enjoy quiet, how to be fulfilled without external validation. And that's important, because when you know how to be alone, you stop accepting love that feels like abandonment in disguise. During this time, he doesn't become detached, he becomes clear about what drains him, clear about what feels safe, clear about the kind of love that actually aligns with who he is. He stops craving attention, stops mistaking chemistry for compatibility, stops confusing being wanted with being understood. And yes, some days are heavy. He still wants connection, still imagines sharing moments with someone, still feels that pull toward closeness. But the difference now is that he won't trade his peace for proximity. He knows the right love won't require him to chase, won't ask him to question his worth, won't make him feel like he has to earn care. So he waits, not anxiously, not desperately, but confidently, because he understands something now. Being alone isn't a punishment. It's preparation. It's a space where he becomes exactly the version of himself the right love will recognize immediately. And when that love finally arrives, it won't feel like relief. It'll feel familiar. The lover boy was never naive. He knew what love could cost him. He knew how deeply it could hurt. He knew it could break him, leave marks he'd carry for years, and he chose it anyway. Not because he didn't understand the risk, but because a life without love felt smaller than a life with scars. For a long time, he thought loving this way was a flaw, something he'd eventually outgrow, something pain was supposed to cure, but it never did. Every heartbreak slowed him down, made him more careful, more aware, but it never killed that part of him that wanted connection, because loving it deeply was never a phase. It was part of his design. He wasn't meant to love casually. He wasn't built for half interest or emotional distance. He was built to choose one person and mean it. That's why it hurt more. That's why waiting felt heavier. That's why walking away took courage. But all of it shaped him. It taught him boundaries without bitterness, standards without arrogance, patience without self-abandonment. So now, when he looks back, he doesn't regret loving the way he did. He doesn't regret caring too much. He doesn't regret believing. He doesn't regret wanting something rare, because one day someone will meet him in that same place. They won't flinch at his intensity, they won't joke about his softness, they won't treat his loyalty like it's replaceable, they'll recognize it. And when that happens, everything will feel different. No anxiety, no confusion, no wondering where he stands, just clarity, effort that feels mutual, love that feels chosen, connection that doesn't require him to dim anything, and suddenly all the waiting makes sense. Not because it was easy, Dios, but because it protected him from settling for less than he was capable of giving. So no, the lover boy doesn't die, he doesn't disappear, he doesn't harden into someone unrecognizable, he just learns who deserves him, and when the right love finally arrives, he won't have to prove anything. He'll simply be met, and that's all he ever wanted. Leave her alone, bro. Not because you stopped caring, but because you cared longer than you should have. You gave her chances when she gave you confusion. You gave her patience when she gave you mixed signals. You showed up consistently while she showed up only when it was convenient. And the hardest part to admit isn't that she didn't choose you, it's that you kept choosing her even when she made it clear you weren't a priority. You stayed solid, you stayed available, you stayed hoping one day she'd wake up and finally see you the way you saw her, hoping one day she'd match your effort, your energy, your care, but she didn't, not because you weren't enough, but because she was comfortable. She liked knowing you were there, she liked the attention, the validation, the way you made her feel wanted, but she never wanted to give that same certainty back. You weren't her first choice, you were her safety net, her backup plan, her just in case. And staying in that position slowly destroys you. You start questioning yourself, start wondering if you're asking for too much, start lowering your standards just to keep her around. You tell yourself, maybe she's just busy, maybe she's scared, maybe if I'm more patient she'll change. But deep down you know the truth. Someone who truly wants you won't make you feel like you're fighting for their attention. They won't leave you guessing where you stand. They won't only show up when it benefits them. So leave her alone, not out of anger, not out of ego, not to prove a point. Leave her alone out of respect for yourself, because the moment you stop texting first, stop checking her stories, stop replaying conversations in your head, stop making excuses for her absence, you'll feel it, that quiet, that peace, and it'll feel unfamiliar at first because you've been living in chaos for so long you forgot what calm feels like. But that peace is real. It's the peace of no longer forcing something that was never meant to be mutual. The peace of choosing yourself after constantly choosing someone who wouldn't choose you back. She had her chance, she saw your heart, she saw your effort, she saw what you were willing to give, and if she didn't value you then, don't give her another opportunity to waste you again, because the right person won't need convincing. And the moment you truly let her go, you make room for someone who won't treat your love like an option. Choose yourself now. Walking away doesn't feel strong at first. It feels like withdrawal, like your chest is empty and heavy at the same time, like you're doing the one thing your heart keeps begging you not to do, because even when someone isn't good for you, your attachment doesn't just shut off. You still think about her when your phone lights up, still wonder if she noticed your silence, still catch yourself hoping she'll reach out just so you can feel chosen one last time. That's the part nobody talks about. Leaving someone you loved feels like betraying your own feelings. You start asking yourself if you gave up too soon, if maybe this time would have been different, if maybe you should have tried just a little harder. But here's the truth you keep avoiding. You already tried harder than she ever did. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. Someone who truly values you won't require you to disappear to be noticed. They won't need distance to realize your worth. They won't only miss you once you finally stop showing up. And yeah, she might notice now. She might text later. She might suddenly act interested once she feels you slipping away. But don't confuse curiosity with commitment. People hate losing access. They hate losing control. They hate realizing the person they took for granted finally chose themselves. That doesn't mean she changed, just means she felt the shift. And if you go back now, you'll teach her the same lesson again, that she can give you the bare minimum and still keep you around. Leaving is not about punishing her, it's about protecting you. It's about choosing sleep over stress, peace over potential, consistency over confusion. You're not cold for walking away, you're not heartless for setting a boundary, you're not weak for needing more than uncertainty, you're human, and you deserve a love that doesn't make you feel like you're slowly disappearing just to keep someone comfortable. Walking away hurts, but staying where you're not valued hurts longer, and one day, when the noise finally fades, you'll realize you didn't lose her. You found yourself again. Leaving her alone doesn't mean the feelings disappear. It means you finally stop letting those feelings control you. Because the hardest part isn't cutting contact. It's sitting with the silence afterward. It's waking up and realizing there's no good morning text to send, no story to check, no excuse to reach out, just to see how she's doing. Your brain will try to trick you. It'll replay the good moments, the laughs, the nights where it felt real. It'll tell you that maybe you imagined the distance, maybe you were asking for too much, maybe if you just explained yourself better she would have stayed, but you already explained yourself through effort, through patience, through showing up when it wasn't convenient. Love doesn't need translation. If she wanted to choose you, she wouldn't have kept you guessing. She wouldn't have made you feel like your presence was optional. She wouldn't have treated your consistency like something she could always come back to later. You weren't confusing. You were clear. She just wasn't committed. And yeah, it hurts realizing that the person you'd fight for wouldn't even fight for clarity with you. That's when you have to stop romanticizing the potential and start respecting the reality. Reality is this: you were giving girlfriend level energy to someone who kept you at arm's length. You were loyal to someone who wasn't sure she wanted you at all. Walking away feels unnatural because you're not used to choosing yourself first. You're used to being patient, understanding, giving people time to figure you out while you slowly lose pieces of yourself in the process. But love isn't supposed to cost you your peace. The moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop explaining, the moment you stop waiting for her to finally get it, you reclaim your power. And that scares people who benefited from you staying small. You didn't lose her. You outgrew the version of yourself that was willing to accept half love, and this is only the beginning. And the truth you don't want to admit yet is that leaving her alone feels like you're losing something. Not because she was right for you, but because she became familiar. You got used to waiting, used to hoping, used to reading into crumbs like they were signs. You trained your nervous system to find comfort in inconsistency. So when you finally step back, your body panics before your mind understands. You'll feel restless. You'll feel tempted to break your own boundary. You'll pick up your phone for no reason, scroll, close the app, open it again, just to see if maybe this time she noticed you're gone. And that urge doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're detoxing from someone who kept you emotionally hungry. Because when someone keeps you half-fed, you start confusing starvation with love. You tell yourself, maybe she just didn't know how much I cared. Maybe if I stayed a little longer, maybe I gave up too soon. But you didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you cared too much to keep abandoning yourself. You stayed long enough to know the pattern, the delayed replies, the empty apologies, the promises that never turned into action. You stayed long enough to realize that if someone wanted to show up for you, you wouldn't have to convince them. And deep down, you know that. That's why the silence hits different now. It's not empty, it's honest. For the first time, you're not waiting for her mood to decide your worth. You're not shrinking yourself to stay chosen. You're not wondering if today's the day she finally treats you right. And yeah, it hurts. Because healing doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels lonely. But loneliness with self-respect will always be quieter than love that keeps you anxious. One day you'll look back and realize leaving her alone was the moment everything started changing. Not because she came back, but because you finally came back to yourself. At some point, you have to ask yourself a hard question. How long are you willing to wait for someone to finally treat you right? Not because they're evil, not because they're a bad person, but because they keep showing you over and over that you're not a priority. And the scary part, you already know the answer. You've known it for a while. You just didn't want to accept it. Because accepting it means admitting that the future you imagined with them was built more on hope than reality. You weren't in love with what was happening. You were in love with what could have happened if they just showed up the way you needed. So you stayed, you waited, you overextended yourself, you gave patience to someone who gave you uncertainty, you gave loyalty to someone who gave you mixed signals, you gave understanding to someone who never tried to understand you, and every time they pulled away, you blamed yourself. Maybe I'm asking for too much, maybe I'm being dramatic, maybe this is just how love is, but love is not confusion. Love is not constantly guessing where you stand. Love is not feeling anxious every time your phone lights up or doesn't. Love doesn't make you feel replaceable. What really kept you stuck wasn't them. It was the version of you that believed walking away meant you failed, but leaving doesn't mean you lost. It means you finally stopped losing yourself, because staying with someone who makes you feel unwanted slowly erodes your confidence in ways you don't notice at first. You stop speaking up. You stop expecting effort. You start accepting bare minimum behavior and calling it maturity. You start shrinking your needs so you don't scare them away, and that's when love stops being love and starts becoming survival. You don't need to be less to be loved. You don't need to be quieter, cooler, easier, more convenient. The right person won't feel overwhelmed by your care. They won't feel annoyed by your presence. They won't treat your love like something disposable. They'll meet you where you are instead of making you feel like you're always asking for too much. And choosing yourself feels lonely at first because you're breaking a habit. You're breaking the habit of chasing, the habit of waiting, the habit of hoping someone will finally choose you. But peace doesn't arrive loud. It arrives quietly. In the moments you stop checking your phone, stop explaining yourself, stop wondering why you weren't enough. One day you'll realize you don't miss them. You miss who you were before you started doubting your worth, and that version of you, they're still there. You didn't lose love, you protected it. You didn't walk away from something good. You walked away from something that was slowly breaking you. And that's not weakness, that's growth. And what nobody tells you is that once you finally stop chasing them, that's when everything gets quiet. Not empty quiet, honest quiet. No more checking your phone every 5 minutes. No more replaying conversations in your head, wondering if you said the wrong thing. No more anxiety before hitting send. No more hoping today will be the day they suddenly care more. At first it feels uncomfortable because chaos became familiar, confusion felt normal, and peace feels strange when you're not used to it. You might even miss them for the wrong reasons. Not because they treated you well, but because your nervous system got addicted to inconsistency. You got used to highs and lows, to feeling chosen one day and invisible the next, to chasing validation instead of receiving love. That kind of pattern messes with your head. It makes you mistake emotional stress for passion. It makes stability feel boring and uncertainty feel exciting. But real love doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't disappear when things get inconvenient. It doesn't require you to earn basic respect. Real love feels safe. Not dull, not dramatic, safe. And when you finally step away, you start noticing things you ignored before. How drained you were, how much energy you poured into someone who barely poured back, how often you made excuses for behavior that hurt you. You start realizing how much love you actually have to give, how deeply you care, how loyal you are when you choose someone. And instead of feeling ashamed of that, you begin to see it as strength, because one day, someone will meet that energy without hesitation. They won't flinch when you care deeply. They won't pull away when things get real. They won't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by being yourself. They'll choose you without you having to beg. They'll show up without being reminded. They'll make you feel wanted without confusion. And when that happens, you'll look back at the version of you who stayed too long, and you won't feel regret. You'll feel proud that you learned, proud that you walked away, proud that you chose peace over potential, because letting go wasn't the end of your story. It was the moment you finally made space for something better. At some point, you have to accept a hard truth. If they wanted to show up, they would have. If they cared the way you cared, you wouldn't be confused. You wouldn't be questioning where you stand. You wouldn't be asking strangers for advice just to understand their silence. Love isn't subtle. Effort isn't hidden. Interest doesn't need decoding. When someone wants you in their life, they make space, not excuses, not delays, not half responses at midnight when they're bored. And the reason it hurts so much to accept this is because you invested emotionally before you were ever chosen properly. You imagined futures, you pictured moments that never actually happened. You fell in love with potential instead of reality. That's not weakness, that's hope. But hope becomes dangerous when it keeps you stuck, when it convinces you to stay loyal to someone who treats you like an option, when it makes you believe that patience will eventually turn into priority. It won't. People don't suddenly wake up and value you after months of showing you they don't. They don't magically learn how to love you correctly once they realize you'll stay no matter what. If anything, they learn they don't have to try. And that's why walking away feels so heavy, because you're not just letting go of them. You're letting go of the version of the future you created in your head. You're grieving something that never fully existed. That kind of loss is real. You'll miss the idea of them more than the person. You'll miss what you hoped they'd become, not what they actually showed you. And that's okay. Healing doesn't mean pretending it didn't matter. It means being honest about why it did and still choosing yourself anyway. You don't need closure from someone who couldn't communicate. You don't need answers from someone who avoided accountability. Their behavior already told you everything. Silence is an answer. Distance is a decision. Inconsistency is a choice. And once you stop chasing clarity from people who benefit from your confusion, you start reclaiming your power. You stop over-explaining. You stop proving your worth. You stop shrinking yourself to fit someone else's comfort. You realize you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And when that finally sinks in, you don't become bitter, you become selective. You start protecting your heart the same way you used to give it away. You start choosing peace over chaos, consistency Consistency over excitement, respect over attachment. Let them go, not because they're a bad person, but because they weren't your person. And the moment you truly accept that is the moment your life starts opening up in ways you couldn't see before. And the craziest part is, once you stop chasing them, you start noticing how quiet it gets. Not the painful kind of quiet, but the kind where your nervous system finally gets a break. No more checking your phone every 5 minutes. No more rereading old messages trying to find meaning. No more wondering if today will be the day they suddenly choose you. You realize how much energy you were burning just trying to feel secure with someone who never offered stability. That constant anxiety, that wasn't love. That was your intuition fighting against your attachment. Real love doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't make you feel disposable. It doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to stay connected. And yeah, letting go hurts at first. There's withdrawal. There's nights where you want to reach out, where your fingers hover over their name, where you almost convince yourself to send that one last message. But every time you don't, you build a little more self-respect. You start realizing how much of yourself you gave away to someone who never protected your heart the way you protected theirs. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for presence. You were asking for effort. You were asking to matter. And one day someone will meet you where you are without you having to beg, explain, or wait. They won't make you feel like you're too much. They won't make you feel like you're replaceable. They won't make you question your value in moments of silence. But you don't get to that person if you keep clinging to the ones who treat you like an option. So let this be the moment you choose differently. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Because the version of you that keeps chasing people who don't choose you deserves rest. And the version of you that finally walks away is the one that makes room for something real. A lot of people don't talk about how hard it is to walk away from someone you still care about, not because you don't see the red flags, but because you remember the good moments too clearly. You remember who they were in the beginning, the version of them that felt safe, the version that made you feel wanted, chosen, important, and you keep hoping that version will come back. That's what keeps you stuck. Not love, hope. Hope that if you wait a little longer, if you explain yourself one more time, if you give just a bit more patience, they'll finally show up the way you need them to. But hope can be dangerous when it's attached to someone who keeps proving they're not willing or ready to meet you halfway. Because every time you ignore their actions and listen to their potential instead, you teach yourself that your needs are negotiable. You start accepting inconsistency as normal, mixed signals as effort, bare minimum as love, and slowly, you stop recognizing yourself. You become quieter, more anxious, more forgiving than you should be. You start blaming yourself for their lack of effort. Maybe I asked for too much. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just how relationships are. But deep down, you know the truth. Love isn't supposed to feel like constant confusion. It isn't supposed to drain you more than it fills you. And it definitely isn't supposed to make you feel alone while you're still technically with someone. That's when you have to be honest with yourself. Not about how much you love them, but about how much staying is costing you. Because loving someone shouldn't mean losing yourself in the process. And what hurts the most is realizing that you were willing to do the hard things for someone who wouldn't even do the simple ones. You showed consistency, they showed convenience, you communicated your feelings, they avoided uncomfortable conversations, you stayed when things got messy, they pulled away the moment effort was required, and yet you still questioned yourself, you still wondered if you were the problem, if you were asking for too much, if you were expecting love the wrong way. But love isn't complicated like that. People make time for what matters to them. They protect what they value. They don't leave you guessing where you stand. The truth is, some people don't lose you because they don't care. They lose you because they never learned how to care properly. They want connection without responsibility, attention without commitment, love without effort. And you can't teach someone how to show up if they don't want to. That's why leaving isn't weakness. It's self-respect finally getting louder than attachment. It's choosing peace over potential, reality over hope, self-worth over familiar pain. Walking away doesn't mean what you felt wasn't real. It means you finally decided that you are real too. And one day you'll look back and realize that the moment you stopped chasing was the moment your life got quieter, lighter, clearer. Because the right person won't make you feel like love is something you have to earn. They'll choose you without being convinced. You stayed longer than you should have because you believed in what could be, not what actually was. You kept replaying the good moments, convincing yourself they meant more than the silence, the distance, the excuses. You ignored the way your chest felt heavy every time you waited for a reply. You ignored how drained you felt after giving everything and receiving the bare minimum. That wasn't love making you tired. That was imbalance. balance. Real love doesn't leave you anxious. It doesn't make you feel disposable. It doesn't turn your patience into pain. And the hardest truth to accept is that some people are comfortable letting you overextend as long as it benefits them. They don't stop you. They don't reassure you. They just take until one day you finally stop giving. And when you do, they feel it. Not because they miss you, but because they miss the access. That's when they reach out. That's when they suddenly care. That's when confusion turns into regret. But by then, you've already changed. You're no longer begging to be chosen. You're no longer shrinking to fit someone else's emotional limits. You're choosing yourself the way you always wished they would choose you. And that choice, that's where your healing actually starts. At some point, you stop missing them and start missing who you were before you questioned your worth for them, before you reread messages trying to find meaning that wasn't there, or you blamed yourself for someone else's lack of effort. That's when it really hits you. You didn't lose them. You lost yourself trying to keep them. You became quieter. You thought twice before speaking. You downplayed your needs so you wouldn't seem like too much. And the crazy part is they never asked you to do that. You did it because you cared. You did it because you were afraid that being fully you would push them away. But love that only survives when you make yourself smaller was never meant to last. Real love doesn't need you to perform. It doesn't need you to chase. It doesn't make you feel replaceable the moment you stop overgiving. And once you understand that, you stop romanticizing the bare minimum. You stop calling inconsistency mystery. You stop calling neglect space. You stop calling emotional distance busy. You see it for what it really was. Someone enjoying your presence without respecting your heart. That realization hurts, but it also frees you, because now you know you're not asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And the next time someone comes along, you won't beg them to stay. You'll watch how they show up. You'll notice how they choose you without being asked. And if they don't, you'll walk away sooner. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. And there comes a point where the pain shifts. It's no longer about missing them. It's about realizing how much of yourself you gave away just to keep them comfortable. You start remembering moments where you stayed quiet even though something hurt. Moments where you said, it's fine, when it really wasn't. Moments where you lowered your standards because you didn't want to seem demanding. You replay conversations in your head and notice how often you explained yourself, how often you justified their behavior, how often you made excuses for why they couldn't show up the way you needed, and that's when it finally clicks. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to do what they were never willing to do. You weren't needy. You were neglected. You weren't overthinking. You were being given mixed signals. You weren't insecure. You were emotionally starved. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You realize how exhausting it was to love someone who only showed up halfway, how draining it was to constantly wonder where you stood with them, how heavy it felt to care more than you were cared for. That kind of love doesn't make you feel safe. It keeps you anxious. It keeps you waiting. It keeps you stuck in a cycle of hoping they'll change while slowly losing yourself. And the saddest part, they benefited from your patience, from your loyalty, from your willingness to stay even when it hurt. You don't get rewarded for suffering in silence. You don't get love by proving how much pain you can tolerate. Love is supposed to feel steady. It's supposed to feel mutual. It's supposed to feel like effort is being met with effort, not excuses. So choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's deciding that you won't keep pouring into someone who leaves you empty. It's realizing that peace feels better than chasing potential that never becomes real. And when you finally choose yourself, you don't become cold. You become clear. Clear about what you deserve. Clear about what you won't accept again. Clear about the fact that the right person won't make you question your value in the first place. After you choose yourself, something strange happens. The noise quiets down. Your phone feels lighter. Chest doesn't feel so tight all the time. You stop waking up with that anxious feeling, wondering if today will be the day they finally show up for you or disappoint you again. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes, stop rereading old messages, stop trying to decode tone, timing, silence, because you finally understand that love was never supposed to feel like a puzzle, and that's when you realize how much energy you were wasting on someone who was unsure about you while you were sure about them. You were loving from a place of hope. They were loving from a place of convenience. You wanted depth. They wanted access. You wanted consistency. They wanted control without responsibility. And once you step back, you see how one-sided it really was. You notice how you were always the one adjusting, always the one compromising, always the one reaching out first, always the one trying to keep things alive. That's not love. That's survival mode. Real love doesn't make you feel disposable. Doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just for wanting basic respect. And here's the hardest truth to accept. Potential means nothing without effort. You weren't in love with who they were. You were in love with who they could be, the version of them that only existed in your head. But you can't build a future with someone's maybe. You can't heal by holding on to what ifs. So you stop romanticizing the bare minimum. You stop giving credit for intentions that never turn into action. And slowly, your standards rise back up to where they were always meant to be. You start asking better questions. You start walking away sooner. You stop explaining your worth to people who never planned to value it. And the craziest part, the moment you stop settling, you realize how much you were settling before. You realize you don't miss them. You miss the version of yourself that believed love had to hurt to be real, but it doesn't. Love can be calm. Love can be safe. Love can feel like rest instead of stress. And once you experience that, you'll never beg for confusion again. Leaving her alone doesn't mean you stop caring overnight. Doesn't mean you suddenly forget her laugh, her voice, the way she made things feel alive for a moment. It means you finally accept the truth you've been avoiding. That love without reciprocity will slowly drain you until there's nothing left. You were pouring into someone who never learned how to pour back. And no matter how patient you were, no matter how consistent you stayed, you can't teach someone to value you if they don't want to. You kept telling yourself, maybe she's just going through something. You made excuses for the missed calls, the late replies, the emotional distance. You told yourself love was supposed to be patient, that real men stay, that walking away meant you didn't try hard enough. But here's the part nobody talks about. There's a difference between being patient and being neglected. There's a difference between loyalty and self-abandonment. And you cross that line without even realizing it. Every time you texted first, every time you ignored your own gut, every time you accepted the bare minimum just to keep her close, you taught yourself that your needs came second. You shrank yourself to fit into a space she barely made room for. And that does something to you. It makes you question your worth. It makes you wonder why loving someone feels like punishment. It makes you think something is wrong with you. And the truth is, you were just loving the wrong person. Leaving her alone is the first time you choose yourself. It's the first time you stop begging for effort and start demanding peace. It's realizing that love isn't supposed to feel like anxiety, confusion, or constant doubt. The right person won't make you question where you stand. They won't make you compete with silence. They won't make you feel disposable. You don't need closure from her. You don't need one last conversation. Her actions already told you everything you needed to know. And as hard as it is, walking away now is what protects the part of you that still believes in real love. Part of you that deserves consistency, reassurance, and effort without having to ask. This isn't about her anymore. It's about you learning that choosing peace is not weakness, it's growth. What hurts the most isn't even losing her. It's realizing how long you stayed when your heart was begging you to leave. It's remembering all the moments you felt small but ignored it because loving her felt bigger than loving yourself. You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because you hoped, because you saw potential, because you believed that if you loved hard enough, showed up enough, proved yourself enough, things would change. But love doesn't work like that. You can't love someone into choosing you. You can't be consistent enough to make someone consistent back. You can't sacrifice your peace forever and call it love. At some point, staying becomes more painful than leaving, and that's where you are now. You're gonna have nights where you almost text her, nights where your fingers hover over her name, where your mind starts replaying the good memories and conveniently forgets the pain. You'll miss the comfort of what was familiar, even if it wasn't healthy. That doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're human. Healing doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop going back. And slowly, without even realizing it, things will start to change. You'll wake up one day and notice your chest doesn't feel as heavy. You won't check your phone as much. Her name won't be the first thing on your mind when something good or bad happens. You'll start laughing again, not forced, not distracted, but real. You'll start feeling like yourself again. That's when you'll understand why it had to end. Not because she was evil, not because you were unlovable, but because she wasn't capable of meeting you where you stood. And staying would have cost you parts of yourself you can't afford to lose. One day, someone will choose you without hesitation, without confusion, without making you question your worth. And when that happens, you'll look back and realize leaving her alone was the moment your life finally started loving forward. And listen, there's something nobody really prepares you for after you finally walk away. The quiet, not the peaceful kind at first, the kind where there's no chaos, no waiting on replies, no wondering if today will be the day she finally shows up the way you need her to. That silence can feel uncomfortable because you got used to emotional noise, you got used to the highs and lows, the hope, the disappointment, the cycle, and when it's gone, your mind almost panics like it lost something important. But what it really lost was the stress. You're going to question yourself. You'll wonder if you were too harsh, too impatient, too emotional. You'll replay conversations and think, maybe I should have said this differently. Maybe I should have tried one more time. But understand this. If someone truly wanted to stay, they wouldn't have made you feel like you had to beg for effort. You wouldn't have had to over-explain your feelings. You wouldn't have felt like loving them was a constant uphill battle. The version of you that stayed too long did so because he believed in love. And that's not something to be ashamed of, but the version of you now, he's learning discernment. He's learning that love without respect will drain you. That potential means nothing without action. And that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. You didn't lose her. You released someone who was blocking the path to someone better, someone who won't confuse consistency with boredom, someone who won't make you feel like an option, someone who won't need reminders of your worth. Right now, it might feel like you're walking alone, but you're not going backwards anymore, and that's everything. And one day, without even realizing it, you're going to wake up and she won't be the first thought on your mind anymore. Not because you stopped caring overnight, not because what you felt wasn't real, but because you finally gave yourself permission to move forward. The memories won't disappear, but they won't control you either. They'll just be reminders of what you survived, not what you're missing. You'll start to notice how much lighter you feel, how your chest isn't tight every time your phone buzzes, how you're not constantly checking stories, rereading old messages, or wondering why you weren't enough for someone who never knew how to love you properly in the first place. You'll realize how much of yourself you were giving away to someone who kept taking without ever pouring back into you, and that's when it hits you. The problem was never your effort. It was never your heart being too big. It was never you loving too deeply. The problem was that you were offering loyalty to someone who didn't know how to value it. You were offering consistency to someone addicted to convenience. And you were offering real love to someone who only liked the idea of being loved. Walking away wasn't a loss. It was a correction, a reset, a moment where you finally chose peace over potential, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over attachment. That takes strength most people don't have. So don't go back. Not when she gets lonely, not when she suddenly remembers your value, not when she realizes nobody else loved her the way you did, because by then you'll understand something important. Someone who truly wants you won't need to lose you to see your worth. Leave her alone, and finally let yourself be found by someone who won't ever make you question if you matter. No one really talks about how long some men are willing to wait for the one person they truly want. Not days, not weeks, months, sometimes years. And it usually starts with something small, something that doesn't sound final. She says, maybe one day. I'm just not ready right now. I need time. And he hears that like it's a promise, like it means not now doesn't mean never. So he holds on to those words, replays them, builds hope around them, and he waits. He doesn't make it obvious, he doesn't beg, he doesn't pressure. He waits quietly, patiently, convincing everyone, including himself, that he's fine. Because when a man sees you in his future, when he's already chosen you in his heart, waiting feels easier than letting go. He tells himself she's healing. She's figuring things out. She'll come back when she's ready. And sometimes it's hard to tell if that kind of waiting is beautiful or self-destructive, because love like that is rare. A man who's willing to pause his own needs, put his feelings on hold, stay loyal to the idea of you without knowing if you'll ever choose him back. That's not weakness, that's commitment. But commitment without clarity can slowly break someone. So if you have a man like that, someone willing to wait while you sort through your life, you can't treat that lightly. Take the time you need, heal what you need to heal, do what you need to do, but don't let him wait if you already know you're not coming back. Because the cruelest thing is letting someone hold on to hope when all that's waiting for them is disappointment. A lot of men won't walk away. They'll keep telling themselves one more month, one more sign, one more chance, not because they're desperate, but because they care. So if you can love him again, do it fully. And if you can't, tell him, don't make him wait just to slowly lose himself loving someone who was never going to return. What people don't see is what waiting does to him. Not on the outside. He looks fine. He still shows up. Still laughs at the right moment, still pretends he hasn't built his days around the possibility of you coming back. But inside, everything is on pause. He doesn't let himself move on, doesn't let himself get close to anyone else, doesn't let himself fully hope or fully let go, because doing either would feel like betraying the future he pictured with you. So he lives in the middle, not chosen, not free, just waiting. He rereads old messages looking for reassurance that maybe he didn't imagine the connection. He remembers how you looked at him, how you laughed with him, how real it felt, and that's what keeps him there. Not obsession, not desperation, memory. He tells himself real love requires patience, that if it's meant to be, it'll come back around. But patience without direction starts turning into quiet pain, because every time you say, "I don't know yet," he hears, "Not now, but maybe," and maybe is enough to keep him holding on. What breaks him isn't waiting itself. It's not knowing whether the waiting means something to you too. He would wait longer if he knew it mattered. He would walk away if he knew it didn't. But uncertainty keeps him stuck, and the longer he stays there, the more of himself he puts on hold. His needs, his timing, his chance to be loved fully, all for someone who may never come back. And that's the part no one talks about. Waiting doesn't just cost time, it costs pieces of him he doesn't realize he's giving away. At some point, the waiting starts asking questions back, not out loud, not in a way he can easily answer, just quiet thoughts that show up late at night when there's nothing left to distract him. Am I being patient, or am I just afraid to let go? Because there's a difference. Patience comes with trust, with direction, with some kind of reassurance that the waiting has meaning, but what he has is uncertainty. He's not waiting because he's calm. He's waiting because walking away would mean admitting that the future he imagined might never happen. And that's harder than staying still, so he tells himself stories. That love is supposed to hurt a little, that timing matters more than readiness, that if he just proves he's loyal enough, consistent enough, understanding enough, it'll all make sense one day. But love isn't supposed to feel like erasing yourself. It isn't supposed to require putting your life on hold indefinitely. It isn't supposed to make you question whether your needs matter at all. Still, he stays. His hope is quiet, but it's persistent. He whispers things like, "She'll come back. She just needs time. It'll be worth it." And as long as that voice exists, letting go feels like failure, like giving up on something real. What scares him most isn't the idea of her choosing someone else. It's the idea that she might never choose anyone, and he still waited anyway. That he might look back one day and realize he sacrificed his own chance to be loved fully for someone who was never coming back. And that realization doesn't make him angry. It makes him tired, because waiting stopped feeling romantic a long time ago. Now it just feels heavy. And deep down, he's starting to understand something he's been avoiding. Love shouldn't feel like standing still while life passes you by. There comes a moment when waiting stops feeling like love and starts feeling like self-abandonment. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no dramatic breaking point. It's quieter than that. It's the realization that his life has been moving around someone who isn't moving toward him, that he's been planning a future with someone who won't even promise a present. He notices it in small ways, how he avoids making plans because what if she comes back? How he turns down opportunities because he doesn't want to feel unavailable when she finally decides. How he measures his growth, his happiness, his healing against whether or not it would still fit her. And that's when it hits him. Waiting has slowly become a way of disappearing, not because he doesn't love her, but because loving her has started costing him himself. He tells himself love requires sacrifice, but sacrifice isn't supposed to be one-sided. Real love doesn't ask you to pause your entire life without offering anything solid in return. And for the first time, he lets himself ask a dangerous question. If she never comes back, would this still have been worth it? That question hurts because the answer isn't immediate, because a part of him still wants to believe that patience will be rewarded, but another part, the quieter, tired part, knows something has to change. He starts realizing that choosing himself doesn't mean he loved her less. It means he finally loved himself enough to stop waiting in uncertainty. Letting go doesn't erase what they had. It It doesn't make the feelings fake. It doesn't turn the waiting into a mistake. It just means he's done confusing hope with a promise, because love shouldn't require you to disappear quietly just to prove you're loyal. And walking away doesn't mean he stopped caring. Sometimes it means he cared enough to stop hurting himself in silence. Letting go hurts differently than waiting ever did. Waiting was familiar, painful but predictable. It gave him something to hold on to, even if that something was uncertainty. Letting go feels like free fall, because when he finally stops waiting, there's no future version of them to lean on anymore. No, maybe one day. No imagined moment where she finally says she's ready. Just silence, and that silence is loud at first. He feels it in the empty spaces where hope used to sit, in the routines he built around the idea of her coming back. For a while, he doesn't know who he is without the waiting, because waiting gave his love direction. It gave his patience purpose. It made the pain feel meaningful. Now he has to sit with something harder, grief, not just for her, but for the version of himself who believed love always meant endurance. He realizes how long he ignored his own needs, how often he told himself later, instead of asking for what he deserved now. And that realization stings, because he wasn't weak, he was loyal. He just stayed loyal to someone who couldn't meet him where he stood. Healing doesn't come all at once. Some days he still wonders if he gave up too soon, if one more month would have changed everything. But then he remembers how heavy the waiting felt, how small his world had become, how much of himself he put on hold, and slowly something shifts. He starts choosing himself in quiet ways. He makes plans without hesitation. He opens himself to new moments without checking if they'd interfere with the future that no longer exists. And for the first time in a long time, his life starts moving forward again. Letting go didn't mean he stopped loving her. It meant he stopped abandoning himself. And that's when healing actually began. After the waiting ends, there's a strange emptiness that follows, not because he lost her, but because he lost the version of himself that believed love had to hurt to be real. For a long time, his worth was tied to patience, to loyalty, to how much he was willing to endure without being chosen back. And when that chapter closed, he didn't immediately feel strong. He felt unsure, because when you spend so long putting someone else first, you forget what it feels like to be a priority in your own life. He starts noticing it in small moments, how uncomfortable it feels to ask for what he needs, how he second guesses himself when someone shows interest too easily, because ease feels unfamiliar now. He was used to earning affection, proving commitment, waiting quietly without complaint, so when someone shows up without confusion or hesitation, it almost feels wrong. Like love should require more suffering than this. That's when he realizes how deeply the waiting shaped him. He didn't just pause his life, he learned to minimize himself. He learned that his needs could wait, that his feelings were negotiable, that love meant staying even when nothing was being offered in return. Unlearning that takes time. He has to remind himself that love isn't supposed to feel uncertain, that commitment doesn't mean self-erasure, that being chosen shouldn't feel like a reward for endurance. Slowly he starts rewriting the rules. He lets himself want clarity. He lets himself walk away when something feels one-sided. He stops confusing consistency with compatibility, and piece by piece his sense of worth comes back, not because someone else validates it, but because he no longer abandons himself to keep someone else comfortable. He waited because he meant it, but now he understands something important. The right person won't need him to suffer quietly to prove his love. They'll meet him where he stands. Waiting leaves marks, not obvious ones. Nothing you can point to and explain easily. But after someone has waited that long, they don't love the same way again. He becomes more careful, not closed off and just aware, because once you've given that much patience to the wrong person, you learn how expensive your loyalty really is. He no longer rushes into hope, no longer builds futures in his head without evidence in the present, not because he's bitter, but because he knows what it costs to believe too soon. He listens differently now. When someone says, "I'm not ready," he hears it clearly. When someone says, "I don't know what I want," he doesn't translate it into possibility. He takes words as they are, not as promises he can grow hope around. That doesn't make him cold, it makes him intentional. He still loves deeply, still commits fully, but only where clarity exists, because waiting taught him that love shouldn't feel like uncertainty stretched over time. He no longer tries to prove his worth through endurance. He doesn't stay where effort isn't mutual. He doesn't confuse potential with reality, and that makes him harder to lose, not because he withholds love, but because he now knows when to walk away. He understands that choosing someone means choosing himself too. That real connection doesn't ask him to pause his life indefinitely. It doesn't ask him to suffer quietly just to stay loyal. Waiting didn't break him, it refined him. It taught him what love isn't, though he could finally recognize what it is. And when he loves again, it won't be out of fear of losing. It will be out of certainty. The next time he loves someone, it won't start with waiting. It'll start with clarity, because once you've waited that long for someone who couldn't meet you halfway, you stop confusing effort with connection. He won't wonder where he stands anymore. He won't analyze pauses, he won't read into silence or turn uncertainty into hope, not because he's less romantic, but because he's learned what love is supposed to feel like. The next person he loves won't have to guess how he feels. They won't have to question his loyalty. They won't have to wonder if he's serious, because when he chooses fully, but this time he'll only stay where he's chosen back. He won't pause his life waiting for someone to decide. He won't put his heart on hold for potential. He understands now that real love doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't stretch uncertainty across months and years. It doesn't ask you to sacrifice peace just to stay connected. The next person will feel the difference. Not because he loves harder, but because he loves cleaner, with boundaries, with honesty, with the expectation of mutual effort. And that's the quiet shift no one sees. Waiting didn't make him bitter, it made him precise. It taught him that commitment means nothing without intention behind it. So when he gives his time again, his patience again, his heart again, it won't be because he's afraid to lose. It'll be because both of them are choosing each other in the present. Not someday, not maybe, now. The people who wait the longest are often the hardest to replace, not because they demand attention, not because they make noise, but because they loved with patience most people don't have anymore. When he was waiting, his presence felt easy to overlook. He was steady, consistent, always there, and consistency can become invisible to people who aren't ready to value it. So they assume he'll always be there, that his patience has no limit, that his loyalty is permanent. But what they don't realize is that waiting teaches restraint. It teaches someone exactly how much they're willing to give before they stop. So when he finally walks away, it's quiet, no drama, no announcement, no attempt to make anyone regret it. He just goes, and that's when the absence is felt, because he wasn't loud, he was grounding. He was the one who remembered, the one who stayed calm, the one who made things feel safe without asking for anything in return. And when that's gone, it leaves a space it's hard to fill, not with excitement, not with attention, but with depth. That's when people realize they didn't lose someone dramatic, they lost someone rare, someone who would have waited longer than anyone else, but chose not to abandon himself anymore. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that he left, but that he learned how to leave. Because once someone like that is gone, they don't come back confused. They don't come back waiting. They move forward with intention. And by the time anyone realizes what they lost, he's already chosen himself. Waiting was never the problem. The problem was waiting without being chosen back. For a long time, he believed love was proven by how much you were willing to endure, how long you could stay, how patient you could be, how quietly you could hurt without asking for reassurance, and he did that. He waited through uncertainty, through mixed signals, through not right now that never turned into I'm ready, not because he didn't value himself, but because he valued love deeply, but eventually he learned the difference between commitment and self-sacrifice. Real love doesn't keep you suspended. It doesn't ask you to pause your life while someone decides if you're worth choosing. Real love meets you where you are, and the moment he understood that, waiting lost its meaning, because waiting only makes sense when both people are moving toward each other, even slowly, not when one person is standing still hoping to be picked someday. Walking away wasn't easy. It didn't feel empowering at first. It felt like grief. Grief for the future he imagined. Grief for the version of himself who believed patience would be rewarded no matter the cost. But over time, that grief turned into clarity. He realized something simple but life-changing. Love should feel mutual, certain, chosen in the present, not promised someday. So now, when he looks back on the waiting, he doesn't see weakness. He sees proof that he can love deeply. But he also sees the moment he learned to stop giving that depth to people who couldn't return it. He waited because he meant it, but he walked away because he finally understood that the right person won't need him to wait at all. They'll choose him clearly, willingly, and without hesitation, and that's not something you ever have to earn by putting your life on hold. I don't think I ever wanted too much. I didn't need perfection. I didn't need constant attention. I didn't need someone to save me. I just wanted to be cared for. I wanted someone who noticed when I went quiet, someone who checked in without being asked, someone who didn't treat my presence like something optional. But every time I tried to explain that, it sounded like neediness, like I was asking for too much. So I stayed quiet. I accepted less. I told myself I was independent enough to not need reassurance, but deep down that wasn't true. I wasn't asking to be obsessed over. I wasn't asking to be put on a pedestal. I was asking to matter, to feel like my absence would be noticed, like my feelings would be considered, like I didn't have to earn basic care by being easy, understanding, or low maintenance. And every time I didn't get that, I told myself it was fine, that this is just how people are, that expecting care is unrealistic, that I should be grateful for whatever effort showed up, but wanting to be cared for doesn't make you weak. It means you're human. It means you want a connection where effort is mutual and presence isn't forced. And the hardest part is realizing how long you stayed in places where you felt invisible just because you didn't want to seem like you needed too much. I didn't want someone to fix me. I just wanted someone who cared enough to stay aware of me. At some point, wanting to be cared for turns into accepting the bare minimum. You stop asking questions, stop expressing needs, stop pointing out what hurts, because every time you do, it feels like you're asking for too much. So you adjust, you get excited over replies that should be normal, you appreciate effort that should be consistent, you thank people for things they do effortlessly if they truly cared, and you tell yourself this is just how love works. But deep down you feel it, the imbalance, the quiet disappointment, the way you're always the one paying attention. You're not asking for grand gestures, you're asking for awareness, to be checked on, to be considered, to feel like your emotions aren't an inconvenience, but instead you keep shrinking your expectations to fit what people are willing to give. You call it being low maintenance, being understanding, being independent, when really you're just afraid that if you ask for more, you'll lose what little you have. And that's the part that hurts, because you don't want more love, you just want the love that's already there to show up consistently. You don't want to beg for care, you want it to be natural. And the longer you settle, the more you start questioning yourself. Am I too sensitive? Am I needy? Am I wrong for wanting this? But wanting to be cared for was never the problem. Staying where you're barely noticed is. Pretending you don't need care slowly disconnects you from yourself. You start ignoring your own feelings before anyone else can. You tell yourself you're fine even when you're not. You swallow disappointment and call it maturity, because admitting you want care feels risky. It feels like giving someone power to decide whether you're too much, so you choose silence instead. You become the easy one, the understanding one, the one who doesn't ask for reassurance or consistency or emotional presence. And people like that version of you because it asks for nothing, but inside something starts to dull. You feel lonely even when you're not alone. You feel unseen even when someone's there. You start questioning whether your needs are even valid anymore. That's when you know you've gone too far. Not by wanting care, but by convincing yourself you don't deserve it. You weren't meant to love people from a distance. You weren't meant to be strong at the cost of being felt. Care isn't weakness. Wanting it isn't dependency. It's connection. And the moment you deny yourself that truth, you don't just lose it from others, you lose it from yourself. There's a moment where it finally hits you. You've been caring for everyone else while no one was really caring for you. You remember how often you checked in, how often you noticed shifts in tone, how often you adjusted yourself to make things easier for others, and then you look back and realize how rarely anyone did that for you. No one asked if you were okay when you went quiet. No one noticed when your energy changed. No one slowed down enough to really see you. And that realization hurts in a quiet, heavy way because you weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking to be prioritized above everything. You were asking for reciprocity. To feel like your presence mattered as much as you made theirs matter. That's when the exhaustion sets in. Not physical tiredness, Ambrosios, emotional fatigue. The kind that comes from always being the one who cares first, who understands more, who gives grace even when it costs you. You start wondering how you became so good at holding space for people who never learned how to hold it for you. And the truth is uncomfortable. You taught them it was okay to lean on you without leaning back, to receive care without returning it, not because you wanted imbalance, but because you didn't want to feel abandoned. And realizing that is both painful and clarifying because it shows you something important. You weren't asking for too much, you were just asking it from the wrong people. That realization changes how you choose people. You stop being impressed by words. You stop getting attached to potential. You stop mistaking attention for care because now you know the difference. Care looks like consistency. It looks like remembering. It looks like showing up even when it's not convenient. So you start paying attention to who checks in without being prompted, who notices when you're off, who doesn't make you explain why you need what you need. And at first that makes your circle smaller. You walk away from people you once would have stayed for. You stop overextending. You stop being the only one holding things together. Not because you don't care anymore, but because you finally care about yourself too. You don't chase care now. You don't hint at it. You don't downplay your needs to make someone comfortable. You let people show you how they show up. And if they don't, you don't argue with it. You don't try to teach them how to care. You accept the information and move accordingly because wanting to be cared for isn't a flaw, it's a boundary. And the moment you start honoring it, you realize something important. You'd rather be alone than be surrounded and still feel unseen. Choosing yourself feels lonely at first, not because you made the wrong choice, but because you stopped filling the silence with people who never really saw you. You notice the absence quickly, the lack of constant conversation, the quiet that comes when you're no longer overgiving just to stay connected. And that quiet can be uncomfortable because for a long time, being needed made you feel valued. Being available made you feel important. Being the one who cared most made you feel like you belonged. Now you don't do that anymore. You don't reach out first every time. You don't check in when it's never returned. You don't hold space for people who won't hold it for you. And yes, that leaves gaps, but those gaps feel different than the loneliness you had before. Before you were lonely even when surrounded by people. Now you're alone but at peace. There's no resentment building, no quiet disappointment, no wondering why you're not enough. Just space to breathe, space to feel what you feel, space to rebuild a relationship with yourself that isn't based on neglect. You start realizing that loneliness with self-respect is lighter than connection without care. And once you taste that peace, it's hard to go back, because you finally understand being cared for starts with not abandoning yourself anymore. Learning how to receive care is harder than giving it. That part surprised me. I was always good at showing up, at checking in, at being thoughtful without being asked. But when someone tried to do that for me, I didn't know how to relax into it. I questioned it. I downplayed it. I felt uncomfortable being the one who was noticed, because for so long, care felt conditional, like something you earned by being useful, easy, understanding. So when someone offers it freely, without you proving anything, your first instinct is to brace yourself. You wait for it to disappear, you look for the catch, you assume it won't last, and that's not because you don't want care. It's because you're not used to it being consistent. You're used to being the giver, the supporter, the one who adapts. So receiving feels vulnerable in a way giving never did. It means letting someone see you without performing, letting yourself need without apologizing, letting care exist without questioning your worthiness of it. That takes unlearning. Takes time to believe that you don't have to exhaust yourself to deserve tenderness. And I'm still learning that, still reminding myself that care doesn't have to be chased, earned, or negotiated. Sometimes it's just there, and allowing it in is the bravest thing you can do after spending so long surviving without it. At some point, you stop asking why people don't care. You stop replaying conversations, stop analyzing tone, stop wondering what you could have done differently, because that question only keeps you stuck chasing explanations instead of truth. So you ask a different question: who actually shows up for me? Not who says they care, not who means well, not who shows interest when it's easy, but who checks in consistently, who notices when you're quiet, who doesn't disappear when you need space or reassurance or time. And the answer is usually smaller than you expect: fewer people, less noise, more clarity. That realization hurts, but it also simplifies everything. You stop pouring into people who only take. You stop investing in connections that leave you feeling unseen. You don't make announcements, you don't explain your shift, you just move differently. You protect your energy. You reserve your care for those who return it naturally. And slowly you stop feeling desperate to be noticed, because you're no longer surrounding yourself with people who make you feel invisible. Care stops being something you beg for and starts being something you recognize. And that's when you finally understand being cared for isn't about convincing people to treat you better. It's about choosing the ones who already do. Wanting to be cared for doesn't make you needy. It makes you honest. Needy is asking someone to fill a void they didn't create. Needy is expecting one person to carry everything for you. But wanting care, that's wanting reciprocity. That's wanting your effort to be met, your presence to be valued, your emotions to be considered. You're not asking someone to revolve their life around you. You're asking them to see you. And somewhere along the way, you were taught that asking for that was too much. So you minimized yourself. You softened your needs. You told yourself independence meant not needing anything from anyone. But that wasn't strength. That was self-denial. Because even the strongest people need to feel cared for sometimes. Need to feel noticed. Need to feel like their existence matters to someone else. You don't want care because you can't survive without it. You want it because connection is part of being human. And the moment you stop shaming yourself for wanting that, everything changes. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop pretending you're okay with being overlooked. You stop accepting crumbs just to feel included. You realize something important. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong people. At the end of all this, I realized something simple. Wanting to be cared for is not something I negotiate anymore. I'm done explaining why it matters, done justifying why I feel hurt, done shrinking my needs so someone else can stay comfortable. Care is not a bonus, it's not extra, it's not something you earn by being quiet, easy, or low maintenance. It's the baseline. If someone doesn't notice me, doesn't check in, doesn't consider how their actions affect me, then they don't get access to me. Not out of bitterness, not out of anger, out of self-respect. I spent too long convincing myself that wanting care made me weak, too long accepting half presence and calling it connection, too long staying where I felt invisible, just to avoid being alone. I'm not doing that anymore. I don't need to be chased. I don't need to be obsessed over. I just need to be considered. And if someone can't do that naturally, without me begging, hinting, or explaining, then they're not my person. Because the right people won't make you feel guilty for wanting to matter. They won't make care feel conditional. They won't make you question whether you're asking for too much. They'll just show up. And until that happens, I'd rather stand alone with my needs intact than sit beside someone who makes me feel unseen. I didn't want too much. I just wanted to be cared for. And now I care enough about myself to never accept less again. I still remember the last message she ever sent me. Not because it was long, not because it explained everything, but because it didn't. It was simple, short, like it didn't carry the weight of everything that came before it, and that's what made it hit harder. Because how do you go from talking every day to one final message that feels like nothing? At first I kept rereading it, not because I didn't understand it, but because I felt like there had to be something more hidden in it, some deeper meaning, some explanation between the lines, something that would make it all make sense. But there wasn't. It said just enough to end things and not enough to explain them, and that's what messes with you, because your mind keeps trying to fill in the gaps that they left empty. I kept thinking back to everything before that message, all the conversations, all the moments that felt real, all the things she said that made it seem like we were building something. And then I'd look at that last message again, and it didn't match. It didn't feel like it came from the same person. Because how do you go from consistency to something that feels so detached, so final, without feeling final at all? The hardest part wasn't even what she said, it was what she didn't say. No real explanation, no real accountability, no real closure, just something that closed the door without ever fully acknowledging what was behind it. And that leaves you stuck in a weird place, because you're not just dealing with an ending, you're dealing with questions that never got answers. For a while I wanted to reply, not to argue, not to convince her to stay, just to understand, to ask the questions that were sitting in my head. What changed? When did it change? Was any of it real? But I didn't, because deep down I knew something. If she wanted me to understand, she would have explained it the first time. And that's a hard truth to accept, because it means the silence after that message was intentional, not confusion, not hesitation, a decision. She said what she wanted to say, and everything she didn't say was also part of that choice. After that, the conversation just stopped. No follow-ups, no checking in, no, how are you? Just silence. And silence hits different when you're used to hearing from someone every day. Because now it's not just quiet, it's absence. For a while I kept expecting another message, something more, something that would make it feel complete, but nothing came. And eventually, I had to accept something I didn't want to. That last message was really the last one. And over time, I stopped looking at it like something unfinished. I stopped expecting more, because sometimes closure doesn't come from another person. It comes from accepting what they already showed you, and what she showed me was enough, even if it wasn't explained. I still remember the last message she sent me, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. It was the end. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. And now I understand something I didn't then. The way someone ends things tells you everything you need to know about how they saw it. So I stopped waiting for another message, stopped looking for more words, because the last one was already saying everything it needed to, just not in the way I wanted. There wasn't a big moment, no argument, no dramatic ending, no clear, this is over. That's what made it worse, because the moment I realized she stopped loving me was quiet. It was in the way she talked to me, the way her voice didn't carry the same feeling anymore, the way everything sounded the same but felt different, and that's when it hit me. Nothing happened, but everything changed. At first I tried to ignore it, because when something shifts like that, your first instinct isn't to accept it, it's to explain it. Maybe she's just tired, maybe she's stressed, maybe she just needs time. So I kept talking to her like nothing changed. Like if I stayed the same, things would go back to how they were, but they didn't. The conversations were still there, but the feeling wasn't. She still replied, still answered, still kept things going just enough, but something was missing. That energy, that warmth, that feeling like she actually wanted to be there, and you can feel that difference even if you don't want to admit it. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Shorter replies, less emotion, less effort to keep things alive, like I was someone she talked to, not someone she was connected to. And that's when it started sinking in, because love doesn't disappear all at once. It fades slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you're the only one still holding on to what it used to be. And that realization hits in the smallest moments. A dry reply, a delayed answer, a conversation that used to flow that now feeling forced. I kept thinking it would come back, that maybe it was just a phase, that maybe I just needed to be more patient, so I stayed. I kept showing up the same way, hoping she'd meet me there again, but she didn't, and that's when it finally clicked. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet realization. I'm still here, but she's not. Not really. Not in the way she used to be. That's the hardest kind of ending. Because nothing officially ended, there's no clear moment to point at. Just a slow shift until you're standing in something that looks the same, but doesn't feel the same at all. And once you feel that, you can't unfeel it. You can try to ignore it, try to convince yourself it's temporary, but deep down, you know, something changed, and it's not coming back. The moment I realized she stopped loving me was the moment I stopped feeling loved by her. No words, no explanation, just a feeling that wasn't there anymore. And now I understand something clearly. Love doesn't just live in words, it lives in effort, in presence, in consistency. And when those disappear, the feeling follows. That was the moment, not loud, not obvious, just real.